Chapter 1772 Playing a Piece. Chapter 1772 Playing a Piece. Fu Gaoyun enjoyed music, and this was something that everyone was aware of. Thus, it was also extremely easy for his followers to flatter him. They simply needed to ask him to play a few pieces, and this would definitely delight Fu Gaoyun to no end. However, now was different. After being led astray by Ling Han, Fu Gaoyun seldom played his guqin anymore. This was because he would involuntarily recall descending lotus flowers each time he tried to play a piece. In the end, he would go completely astray and start playing the descending lotus flowers instead. As a young master of the Fu clan, how could he play such a tasteless piece? Thus, asking him to play a piece or two wasn't flattering him anymore. Instead, it was offending him. "Yeah, that's right. Young Master Yun, why don't you play a piece of two?" someone else said in encouragement. How could they know about the trauma in Fu Gaoyun's mind? Thus, they all started to encourage him to play a few pieces. Fu Gaoyun couldn't withstand their enthusiasm, so he could only retrieve his guqin and forcefully calm himself down. Many days had passed, and with his powerful mindset, he had naturally walked out from that crooked path already. However, the condition was that he didn't think of Ling Han. Otherwise, his tune would definitely go astray again. "I won't think about it. I won't think about it." He closed his eyes and placed his fingers onto the guqin. Clear and spring-like sounds instantly flowed out from his instrument. Objectively speaking, Fu Gaoyun was indeed extremely talented in music. Of course, this was fairly inevitable. After all, having lived long enough, and having enough talent, what couldn't one become skilled at as long as they put in the effort? Everyone swayed their head in intoxication. Regardless of whether they truly enjoyed music or not, they definitely had to act as if they did at this moment. Meanwhile, Ling Han yawned in boredom. He didn't have a single artistic bone in his body, and if he had the spare time, he would rather cultivate or research alchemy than waste his time listening to music. He smiled at the Empress and the heavenly phoenix divine Maiden, and a mischievous thought was already forming in his mind. He extended a finger and started to lightly tap the teacup before him. This was none other than the tune of descending lotus flowers. This sound was extremely soft, yet almost everyone present was at the severing mundane tier. As such, how could they not hear it? However, most of them didn't mind, as the sound was truly very soft. Yet, it was a completely different situation for Fu Gaoyun. His eyes were closed, and his mind was completely focused. To him, listening to himself playing the guqin was a great source of enjoyment. At this moment, however, a familiar tune suddenly crept into his mind. Descending lotus flowers. There was a ring, and the tune of his piece immediately started to change. Fu Gaoyun almost choked upon hearing this. "No, I'm not going to listen. I'm not going to listen." He hurriedly repeated this in his mind, yet the more he repeated it, the clearer that faint sound became. In the end, it transformed into a roaring river that surged through his mind. In the end, his fingers also started to go astray, and he started to play descending lotus flowers instead. Everyone faltered upon hearing this, and they couldn't help but exchange confused glances. They could all see the puzzlement and awkwardness in each other's eyes. What in the world was young Master Yun playing? Why did it sound like the story of a beggar? "Forget about it. Forget about it," Fu Gaoyun said. He finally came to his senses, and he immediately pushed his guqin away. His expression was as if he had endured great humiliation. Meanwhile, everyone else was wearing strange expressions. They wanted to laugh, yet they didn't dare to. They wanted to speak, yet they also didn't dare to. They felt as stifled as could be. "Ha ha!" However, Ling Han immediately roared with laughter. He was the culprit, and he also dared to admit that he was the culprit. Facing Ling Han, Fu Gaoyun could only shake his head in exasperation. "What's so enjoyable?" a young man asked as he walked over. He was stumbling a little, and his steps were slightly uneven. "Brother Chang!" everyone immediately said in greeting. This person was Qing Zhong, a member of the Qing clan, one of the most powerful subordinate clans of the Fu clan. Thus, Qing Zhong's support was incredibly important to Fu Gaoyun, Of course, it was still difficult to say who would become the next clan leader of the Qing clan. It wasn't necessarily certain that Qing Zhong would become the future clan leader. Because of the Qing clan's power, it was only natural that everyone treated Qing Zhong with respect. In fact, even Fu Gaoyun had to give him face. "Qing Zhong, what's wrong?" Fu Gaoyun asked casually. Qing Zhong shook his head and replied, "Don't mention it. I was bitten by a dog." "What?" Everyone almost spat out a mouthful of tea upon hearing this. After all, this was far too ridiculous. What was Qing Zhong's cultivation level? He was at the middle stage of the fourth severance. At the same time, he was also the most powerful follower of Fu Gaoyun. However, an elite such as him had actually been bitten by a dog? If word of this spread, they would definitely be mocked to death. Meanwhile, Ling Han wore a strange expression upon hearing this. Why did this sound so familiar? "How is that possible?" Fu Gaoyun asked in astonishment. However, he immediately saw the funny side of this, and he asked, "You're so powerful, so how could you have been bitten by a dog?" Sigh. Qing Zhong sighed loudly before saying, "I don't know what happened either. I came across Fu Zhiton when I was heading over, and seeing him running away in disarray, I casually asked how a dog like him had been wounded. However, a large black dog suddenly leaped out from nowhere, and it viciously bit at my bum. It bloody hurt like hell." Everyone was astonished upon hearing this. He had been bitten just like that. He was at the fourth severance. With this information, Ling Han could already confirm that this was the act of none other than the large black dog. Strange. Why had that detestable dog suddenly run over here? Whom did it want to screw over now? When did such a beast appear in the heaven-departing city? Fu Gaoyun asked in puzzlement. Did some powerful being obtain a new immortal beast pet, but not eliminate its wild tendencies yet? No, Qing Zhong said with a shake of his head. That large black dog was even wearing a pair of iron underwear, and it was so dazzling that it almost blinded me. It was a horrible sight. Pooh! Someone finally couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of tea. Come, sit over here and calm down first, Fu Gaoyun said. It was hard to seek revenge after being bitten by a dog. After all, they couldn't go over to bite the dog, could they? Qing Zhong hurriedly shook his hands and said, No need, no need. How would he dare to sit? His bum was hurting like crazy. Everyone grinned in their minds. This was a fairly hilarious encounter. Of course, it was a miserable encounter for the person who was involved. I've gathered everyone here today not only to touch base, but also to discuss an important matter. Fu Gaoyun raised his hand and signified for silence. The Hidden Dragon Mystery Realm is about to open, and we need to determine who's going to enter. Everyone's eyes lit up at the mention of the Hidden Dragon Mystery Realm. This was most likely the ruins of some ancient great sect. When discovered in the past, there had even been a piece of divine metal inside, and this had triggered an earth-shattering battle between 3 celestial king-tier forces. From that point onward, no other rare treasures had appeared in the Hidden Dragon Mystery Realm, but some powerful forces would still occasionally send some people over to try their luck. However, such situations were relatively rare. To the Fu clan, however, the Hidden Dragon Mystery Realm was an incredibly important resource. This was because the Hidden Dragon Mystery Realm produced a kind of matter called Blood Dragon Stones. These Blood Dragon Stones were extremely helpful in raising the cultivation level of those at the Severing Mundane tier, and they could even strengthen one's divine sense, and help them build a solid foundation for advancing to the Dividing Soul tier. From time to time, they would also find some lost cultivation techniques and celestial techniques in this mystery realm. Once perfected, these cultivation techniques and celestial techniques could potentially even reach the level of the Immortal Palace tier or Ascending Origin tier. These were incredibly freakish techniques. Anyhow, because of the earth-shattering battle that had occurred inside the Hidden Dragon Mystery Realm, there were currents of extremely terrifying auras suffusing the entire mystery realm. However, once every 30 million years, a volcano inside the mystery realm would erupt, temporarily suppressing the wild and terrifying auras. During this time, cultivators would be able to enter. Moreover, apart from lava, this volcano also produced blood dragon stones. Even so, one would still need to wear outer garments that were specially made from scraps of blood dragon stones if they wanted to safely enter the hidden dragon mystery realm. Otherwise, their fate could only be death. However, these outer garments were extremely rare, and their effects would also weaken with the passing of time. Thus, they were essentially single-use items. That being the case, only a limited number of people were allowed to enter the hidden dragon mystery realm. Chapter 1773 Fighting Over Spots. Chapter 1773 Fighting Over Spots. Everyone looked toward Fu Gaoyun eagerly in expectation. The hidden dragon mystery realm wasn't fully controlled by the Fu clan. Instead, it was jointly controlled by the 4 nearby 3-star forces. At the same time, some of the further 3-star forces would also stick their noses into this matter. However, they were only allowed to send smaller teams of people. Moreover, the hidden dragon mystery realm also had a restriction: only those at the severing mundane tier could enter. It wasn't that those at the dividing soul tier and immortal palace tier couldn't enter. Rather, it was just that they couldn't venture too deep into the mystery realm. As such, it would be a massive waste of the blood dragon armors to use. Entering the hidden dragon mystery realm signified a potentially huge turning point in their lives. If they were fortunate enough to come across a celestial king tier celestial technique and swallow a few celestial pills, they would become as freakish as could be. Fu Gaoyun was one of the 4 potential successors of the Fu clan, so he was able to give out 10 spots. One of the spots would definitely be reserved for himself, so there were only 9 spots remaining. Young Master Yun, I'm willing to follow you. I'm willing to wade through fire and water to serve you, someone immediately shouted. Their expression of loyalty was as fake as could be. Under their pretense, they were essentially asking for a spot to enter the hidden dragon mystery realm. Young Master Yun, I'm willing to be your loyal servant. Young Master Yun! Young Master Yun! Many people started to call out, and they all expressed their willingness to serve Fu Gaoyun. However, there were also those who were relatively more reserved. For example, Qing Zhong. He was a prodigy of the Qing clan, so he would receive a spot from his clan even if he didn't receive one from Fu Gaoyun. As one of the 5 most powerful subordinate forces of the Fu clan, the Qing clan could naturally receive a portion of the spots to enter the mystery realm. However, this portion was naturally far smaller than what the Fu clan received. Anyhow, since Qing Zhong had decided to support Fu Gaoyun, he would definitely feel resentment toward Fu Gaoyun if he didn't end up giving him a spot. At that time, it was extremely likely that he would leave to support another potential successor. Everything depended on how Fu Gaoyun allocated the spots. This was a test of his leadership skills, and this was something that each clan leader needed to learn about. He definitely couldn't satisfy everyone, so this was a huge test regarding how he would make his choices, as well as how he would console those who weren't selected. Ling Han didn't speak. He knew about the hidden dragon mystery realm, so he decided to obtain a few more blood dragon stones for Fu Gaoyun if he ended up giving him a spot. Such would be his repayment. Even if he didn't obtain enough blood dragon stones, he would still have things like the reincarnation tea to use as a substitute. He would definitely repay Fu Gaoyun if he received a spot. Anyhow, Ling Han's biggest value was his potential. He had the potential to become a celestial king tier elite, and he also had the potential to become a 5-star alchemist. Everything came down to Fu Gaoyun's judgment, as well as his determination to gamble. Moreover, since Fu Gaoyun had announced this to everyone, he had naturally considered all of the possibilities already. He slowly opened his mouth to assign the 9 spots. Sure enough, Cheng Zhong received one of the spots. A person called Li Xian also received a spot. After them, Ling Han and the Empress also received a spot each. As for the final 5 spots, Fu Gaoyun put them up for anyone to receive. They would hold a small competition, and those who achieved victory would receive these spots. Through this method, those who lost wouldn't have anyone to complain to. After all, this was the cultivation world where might made right. After the competition, those who won naturally felt nothing but joy. However, those who lost felt extremely dissatisfied with Ling Han and the Empress receiving 2 of the spots. What right did they have? They had only just arrived, and they didn't have any powerful background, either. Yet they had received 2 of the spots just like that. Who could accept this? However, they didn't dare to express their dissatisfaction before Fu Gaoyun. Thus, they all buried this emotion into the bottom of their hearts. They definitely couldn't swallow this bitter pill. When the gathering ended, Ling Han and the Empress went to their residence in the academy. This was a large residence. In fact, it was essentially a huge courtyard. There were even hundreds of servants, and all of them were at least at the heavenly body tier. This was incredibly extravagant. Fu Gaoyun was very understanding, and he didn't organize 3 separate residences for Ling Han and his 2 wives. Instead, he put them all in the same residence. Right after settling in, Ling Han was informed by a servant that someone had come to visit. Ling Han pondered for a moment before telling the servant to invite the guest in. This was a man in azure robes. His name was Zhao Peng, and Ling Han had seen him during the gathering just then. He was at the peak stage of the first severance, and he hadn't managed to win a spot during the competition just then. Zhao Mingpeng walked into the hall before glancing at Ling Han, and disdainfully saying, "You're Ling Han, right? Visit young Master Yun tomorrow and tell him that you don't want to go to the Hidden Dragon Mystery Realm. Instead, transfer the spot to me. However, I won't take your spot for nothing. Here." He tossed a spatial ring at Ling Han, saying, "There are 10,000 star stones inside. It's more than enough to compensate you." Truth be told, 10,000 star stones was indeed a huge sum of money. However, it was completely worthless when compared to a spot to enter the Hidden Dragon Mystery Realm. Moreover, they had already advanced to the Severing Mundane tier, and obtained a limitless lifespan, so would it be difficult to earn some star stones? Ling Han chuckled as he accepted the spatial ring. An understanding expression spread across Zhao Peng's face. This was just as he had expected. In his eyes, Ling Han didn't have any background at all. Instead, he was only here because Fu Gaoyun held him in high regard. As such, he didn't have any confidence at all. After giving him a fright, he would definitely become as obedient as could be. Sure enough, Ling Han yielded before he could even voice his threats. What an absolute coward! I'll happily accept this welcome gift. Now, piss off! Ling Han waved his hand to dismiss Zhao Peng. What? Zhao Peng faltered upon hearing this. He thought that he had heard wrong, and he asked, "What did you say? Piss off, you understand?" Ling Han smiled, and continued, "Here, I'll teach you. First, place your hands on the ground. After that, place your head on the ground. With that done, you can push with your legs and succeed in rolling forward. With your intelligence, it shouldn't be too hard to learn this." Zhao Peng instantly exploded in rage. "Are you treating me as a retard? You think I don't know how to roll and piss off?" He was furious, and he immediately pointed at Ling Han, shouting, "Don't push me! I'm allowing you to piss off by yourself now. However, if you insist on receiving my help, you're the one who's going to end up suffering," Ling Han said in a calm voice as he took a sip of tea. Zhao Peng laughed in fury. This person was far too audacious. Not only was he refusing to cooperate with him, but he had even stolen his star stones. Where had his courage come from? "Ling Han, you're far too overconfident," he said with a cold chuckle. "I'll give you one final chance. Do as I say. Otherwise, your fate will be incredibly miserable." Ling Han smiled and said, "Same back to you. Don't bring trouble upon yourself." "Impudence!" Zhao Peng roared. He immediately lashed out, unable to contain his anger anymore. If Ling Han were replaced with the Empress, Zhao Peng definitely wouldn't dare to attack her, regardless of how furious he was. After all, she had easily defeated Jin Jiu, a second Severance Elite, in a single strike. Thus, defeating him, a first Severance Elite, would be as easy as pie. However, could Ling Han also be that freakish? Ling Han sighed upon seeing this. There were always those who insisted on receiving a beating before they finally learned to become obedient. That being the case, he could only trouble himself to teach them some life lessons. Pa! He casually reached over and grabbed Zhao Peng's neck. He then lifted him up as if he were a baby chick. Come, I'll help you piss off, Ling Han said as he tossed Zhao Peng into the distance. Pa! Zhao Peng was instantly thrown into the distance, with his momentum causing him to involuntarily roll forward. Zhao Peng rolled all the way to the entrance of the courtyard, and only then did he coincidentally come to a stop. He was both furious and humiliated, and he roared, Where are my star stones? Since you're not cooperating with me, you've got to return my star stones, right? Chapter 1774 Broken. Chapter 1774 Broken. What star stones? Ling Han asked casually. An expression of astonishment then spread across his face, and he said, Perhaps you're referring to the welcome gift that you gave me just then? Say, oh, that's right, what's your name again? He glanced at Zhao Peng, and he didn't give him an opportunity to speak before waving his hand, and saying, Forget about it. That's not important. Say, you're far too insincere. How can you ask for your welcome gift back? Fuck your sister. Zhao Peng felt so aggrieved that he wanted to cry. Ling Han had taken his star stones, and he had also tossed him into the distance and forced him to roll like a ball. Now, he was even saying that he had forgotten his name. How detestable! He hesitated for a moment before lowering his head and running away. After all, he definitely couldn't defeat Ling Han. However, could he allow this person with no background whatsoever to bully him, Zhao Peng? Did he truly think that the Zhao clan was mere decoration? He would return to gather reinforcements. Meanwhile, Ling Han couldn't care less. Regardless of whether he took Zhao Peng's star stones or not, Zhao Peng would definitely continue to target him anyway. Thus, he would simply treat these 10,000 star stones as payment for his trouble. He would continue to play this game with the Zhao clan. However, Zhao Peng definitely wasn't the only person who was planning to target him for the spot to enter the Hidden Dragon Mystery Realm. Moreover, there were definitely more people who wanted to target him because of his lack of background. Shortly after shooing Zhao Peng away, the servant returned to inform him that another visitor had come. The visitor was Fu Junyong. With the surname Fu, he was naturally a member of the Fu clan. However, there were far too many members in the Fu clan, and there were more so countless different branches. The branch that Fu Junyong belonged to wasn't valued much, so they naturally couldn't receive any spots to enter the Hidden Dragon Mystery Realm. As such, Fu Junyong could only rely on Fu Gaoyuan. However, he wasn't strong enough, so he hadn't been able to achieve victory and obtain one of the 5 spots that had been up for grabs. That being the case, he decided to come here to seek Ling Han. This was obviously because he thought Ling Han would be easy to bully. Brother Ling! Fu Junyong greeted enthusiastically upon entering the hall. He was far more intelligent and sophisticated than Zhao Peng. After all, one couldn't strike a smiling person even if they were enraged. Thus, Ling Han smiled and said, Brother Junyong! Fu Junyong refused to mention the spots to enter the Hidden Dragon Mystery Realm, yet he continued to talk about how incredibly dangerous and deadly the Mystery Realm was. His description was as if Ling Han would most definitely die if he dared to enter. Ling Han pretended to be astonished, and he asked, Is it truly so dangerous? Indeed, Fu Junyong replied. He was delighted upon seeing this, and he immediately seized the opportunity to say, Brother Ling, how about this? I should be slightly stronger than you, and the clan will also bestow upon me some treasures to protect myself. Why don't I enter the Mystery Realm in your stead? Rest assured, regardless of how many treasures I obtain, I'll give you 90% and only keep 10% for myself. After all, we're on such friendly terms. Holy fuck. This person is truly Blackheart. At least Zhao Peng still offered me 10,000 star stones. No matter what, that was still tangible wealth. However, this dude is trying to take my spot for nothing? Giving me 90% and only keeping 10% for yourself? Do you think I'll believe you? At that time, what if you claimed that you were extremely unfortunate, and only managed to find 2 pieces of useless rock? How useful will your promise be then? Ling Han immediately rejected this offer, saying, How can I agree to this? We feel like old friends already, so how can I allow Brother Junyong to risk your life for me? How can I accept the fruits of your hard work for nothing? I definitely can't agree to this. Fu Junyong couldn't help but look Ling Han up and down. Was he serious or not? If he were serious, then that would make him far too stupid. However, if he were acting, then his expression was far too realistic and convincing. Thus, he could only say, Brother Ling, I already said. I'm slightly stronger than you, and I also have the support of the clan. Thus, it'll definitely be far safer for me to go in your stead. Then that's even more the reason that I can't agree, Ling Han said in righteousness. What if Brother Junyong gets wounded? What if Brother Junyong accidentally dies? At that time, what will happen to your wife? Won't she be violated by other men? What about your children? Won't they have to refer to other men as father? What if they're maltreated? What if there's no one to burn incense for you in the future? Holy fuck. Your imagination is far too rich and far-fetched. I'm still alive and healthy, so is it really okay for you to curse me like that? However, Fu Junyong couldn't express his anger at this moment. After all, Ling Han was saying this out of care and concern. As such, he could only force himself to swallow these curses. He couldn't help but grimace. Ling Han was cursing him to die, yet he still had to thank him for his concern. This caused him to feel incredibly vexed and stifled. He dazedly stared at Ling Han, and he started to ponder whether he had exaggerated the dangers of the hidden dragon mystery realm a little too much, so much so that he couldn't rein his fibs back in. Why is he so stupid? And why is he so incredibly righteous? Fu Junyong's mouth went dry and he said, Brother Ling, listen to my advice. Don't act so rashly. Ling Han chuckled and replied, If Brother Junyong insists, then it's not as if I can't agree. It's finally come? Delight spread across Fu Junyong's face, and he said, Please do continue, Brother Ling. What do you want me to do? Let's spar with each other. If you're stronger than me, I'll naturally let you go in my stead, Ling Han said. He couldn't be bothered toying with Fu Junyong anymore. Wonderful! No problem! Fu Junyong replied with an eager nod. He was confident that he could defeat Ling Han with relative ease. After all, Ling Han was far too young. Moreover, he was most likely held in high regard by Fu Gaoyun because of his supreme talent and his incredible potential, not his strength. The two of them faced off against each other in the courtyard. Brother Ling, I'm going to attack now, Fu Junyong said with a solemn expression. He didn't want to severely wound Ling Han, as doing so would most likely kill his chances of obtaining the valuable spot. Ling Han nodded and said, Then I'll use my full power. Don't worry, use your full power. I'll also control my own power. Fu Junyong's expression was as if everything were in his grasp. He made a pressing motion, and a huge number of vein patterns of the great Tao instantly materialized before him. Their might was absolutely astounding. As someone who was highly valued by Fu Gaoyun, he was indeed fairly skilled and talented. Although Fu Junyong had only performed normal severances, he had been extremely close to performing flawless severances. However, no matter how close he had been, his severances were still just normal severances. As such, his battle prowess was naturally far inferior to those who had performed flawless severances. Ling Han replied with a simple punch. However, he purposefully condensed sweat on his forehead, making it seem as if he were exerting his full strength. Upon sensing the might of Ling Han's punch, a hint of disdain involuntarily spread across Fu Junyong's face. This battle prowess was far too weak. What talent and potential had Fu Gaoyun seen in him? Moreover, he had actually given him a spot to enter the hidden dragon mystery realm. Ling Han's fist arrived before him. Fu Junyong could feel a burst of power rushing over, yet he didn't think much of it. He was just about to unleash some power to block this strike. However, he suddenly discovered that although this punch was weak, the regulations contained within it were devastatingly powerful. These were terrifying regulations that he couldn't block at all. Raw power and regulations were both important aspects of one's battle prowess. Moreover, starting from the severing mundane tier, regulations would be the more important aspect. Generally speaking, however, cultivators wouldn't abandon their cultivation of power. As such, there was still a notion of measuring battle prowess using raw power. The stronger one's power, the stronger their regulations. That being the case, who would have expected Ling Han's weak-looking punch to contain such overwhelming regulations? Not good! Fu Junyong exclaimed in his mind. However, it was already too late to dodge. The regulations of the great Tao surged through his body. Pooh! He instantly spat a mouthful of blood, and his face also became as white as a sheet. Ling Han hurriedly dashed over and asked, "Aya! Brother Junyong, are you okay? I'm so sorry, I used too much power. I mistakenly thought that Brother Junyong was much stronger than me. However, who would have thought?" He continued to use his words to slap Fu Junyong's face. At this moment, Fu Junyong truly wanted to die. How pitiful he was! He had been pummeled into spitting blood, yet he couldn't find any reason to explode in rage. It was he who had said that he would control his power, and it was he who had told Ling Han to use his full power. Thus, he had no option but to swallow this painful result. This was truly a case of Mr. Wang from next door. Fu Junyong had been completely screwed over. Chapter 1775 Southern Cup Rock Sun Water. Chapter 1775 Southern Cup Rock Sun Water. Fu Junyong left in misery and dejection. The wounds that Ling Han had given him weren't the most important. He could fully recover from these wounds in a dozen or so days. However, the spot to enter the mystery realm. Anyhow, following Fu Junyong, several more people visited Ling Han to ask for the spot to enter the mystery realm. Some of them were relatively polite, and they were willing to use star stones, saintly medicines, or even cultivation techniques to exchange for this spot. However, there were also some who were incredibly arrogant, and they directly ordered Ling Han to yield his spot. When facing the former, Ling Han would also be polite and nicely ask them to leave. Facing the latter, however, Ling Han would directly beat them out of his residence. Pun! There was a violent shudder, and it was as if the entire courtyard were about to collapse. It finally stabilized after a moment, and it was also at this time that a cold and eerie voice suddenly traveled over. "Where's Ling Han? Get the hell out here to greet me!" There was a terrifying might in this voice, and it definitely didn't belong to someone at the severing mundane tier. Instead, it belonged to an elite at the dividing soul tier. Ling Han stood up and started to fly out. At this moment, a young man was standing before the entrance to his residence with his hands clasped behind his back. Although Ling Han regarded him as a youth, judging by his tumultuous vitality, he was at least tens of billions of years old. In fact, he might even be hundreds of billions of years old. His youthful appearance simply signified that he had severed the mundane at a relatively young age. Thus, his appearance had been locked into one of youth. In other words, he would appear young forever. In order to make themselves appear more mighty and dignified, some elites would purposefully age their appearance. However, this person clearly hadn't done so. Anyhow, there was also another person standing behind this youth. This was someone who Ling Han recognized. Fu Jintong. "Oh? You lost to me, so you've brought a dividing soul tier elite over to redeem your pride? What a sore loser! Perhaps you'll run back sobbing and ask for help from your elders every time you're defeated by someone in the future? You're Ling Han?" the dividing soul tier elite asked as he gazed at Ling Han with a cold expression. His name was Fu Siyuan, and he was an elder in the branch that Fu Jingtong belonged to. In reality, there was a difference of many generations between them. However, because everyone had lived for so long, people usually ignored how many generations existed between them, and they all referred to those of the older generations as elder. Ling Han glanced at him, but he remained silent. Fu Jingtong couldn't help but rebuke. "My senior is asking you a question. How was this brat so audacious?" Ling Han wore an indifferent expression and he said, "Oh? So he's actually talking to me? Heh! What kind of attitude is this?" There were flames of anger in Fu Siyuan's mind. How was there such an ignorant and naive junior? When those at the severing mundane tier saw those at the dividing soul tier, shouldn't they all piss themselves in fright? His voice was solemn, and he said, "You used underhanded methods to defeat Xingtong, so now, I want you two to engage in a fair battle again." Underhanded? Ling Han chuckled coldly in his mind. How much of a sore loser was this Fu Xingtong? He had actually made up such a sh*tty excuse? Moreover, if Fu Xingtong truly wanted to redeem his pride, he could have simply returned here by himself. Why bring a dividing soul tier elite with him? Was this not to frighten Ling Han? Did he dare to win? If he won, he would need to face the rage of a dividing soul tier elite. In fact, Fu Siyuan might even interfere with their battle and directly target Ling Han. Most of the students in this academy were only at the severing mundane tier, so they most likely wouldn't be able to detect Fu Siyuan's underhanded techniques. They were blatantly bullying Ling Han. "Fine, then let's battle again," Ling Han said indifferently. Fu Siyuan's and Fu Xingtong's expression was as if they had already expected this outcome. In their eyes, Ling Han naturally couldn't reject the request of a dividing soul tier elite. Meanwhile, Fu Xingtong also felt like he had lost unfairly. His battle prowess was no weaker than Ling Han's, and it was because of Ling Han's high-level pseudo-celestial tool that he had been riddled with wounds. As such, they would both be banned from using pseudo-celestial tools during the following battle. However, he had received a precious treasure from his elder, and this would help him obtain definite victory. His battle with Ling Han didn't simply represent himself and Ling Han. Instead, it also represented the conflict and competition between Fu Gaoyun and Fu Tonghai, two of the potential successors of the Fu clan. The more outstanding a potential successor, the more powerful elites they would naturally attract to their alliance. Similarly, the quality and strength of a potential successor's followers would also directly reflect their influence and power. After leaving the courtyard, Fu Siyuan unleashed a deafening roar that shook the surroundings. It wasn't long before people started to fly over. The more time that passed, the more people that gathered. They had all been attracted here by the loud commotion. "What's going on?" everyone asked. They were confused as to what was happening. Fu Siyuan immediately explained that this was a simple sparring match. A sparring match? Then why do they need a dividing soul tier elite? Everyone watched on in curiosity. Meanwhile, Ling Han faced off against Fu Xingtong. "Ling Han, you relied on your pseudo-celestial tool to achieve a slight advantage over me last time. This time, however, we'll simply compete using our celestial techniques. We'll spar using our true strength," Fu Xingtong said. His face was filled with indignance. He truly believed that he had lost because of Ling Han's pseudo-celestial tool. Thus, he would decisively turn the tables and achieve victory this time. Ling Han shrugged his shoulders and said, "Alright, so are you going to fight or not? If you want to fight, then stop uttering nonsense. Otherwise, your words will come back to bite you when you lose again." Fu Xingtong humphed upon hearing this. "One." With a single thought, a water dragon surged out from his body. This was a crystalline and semi-transparent dragon whose scales were all formed from the symbols of the Great Tao. Its might was utterly terrifying. "Southern Cup Rock Sun Water!" someone immediately exclaimed in astonishment. "After transforming and developing for hundreds of millions of years, this is the formation of intelligence and form of the Great Tao of Water." Gasp! Unleashing something like this? Southern Cup Rock Sun Water. This was a spiritual matter nurtured and birthed by heaven and earth. In essence, this was an extremely nutritious and beneficial matter. If a cultivator refined it, not only would their origin power rise by an explosive amount, but even their control over water element regulations would improve by a significant degree. However, such precious treasures could only be discovered by chance. In fact, even celestial king tiers couldn't necessarily obtain such treasures. Moreover, the Southern Cup Rock Sun Water could still continue to evolve. It could still develop a spirit and gain awareness, thereby becoming a true life form. This was quite terrifying. According to rumors, the most powerful of these spiritual matters could even reach the ascending origin tier. This was only a single major tier below the celestial king tier. If these spiritual matters advanced to the celestial king tier, they wouldn't be spiritual matters anymore. Instead, they would become source power. For example, ancestral flames and source water. Thus, everyone was stunned upon seeing the southern cup rock sun water that Fu Zhutong had unleashed, especially since it had already developed intelligence. No, this southern cup rock sun water doesn't have enough spiritual awareness yet. It doesn't seem like it's developed a true life, a sharp-eyed person immediately said. It was most likely captured by an elite while it was forming intelligence and awareness. They then disturbed the process, resulting in it having a spirit, but not enough spiritual awareness. Even so, this is still southern cup rock sun water that has developed a spirit. Its power and might is simply astounding. Fu Zhutong was brimming with pride and haughtiness. An ancestor of his branch had coincidentally obtained this southern cup rock sun water a very long time ago. However, few people knew about this. If he hadn't been humiliated so greatly, and if it weren't because of his lack of confidence against Ling Han, his ancestor definitely wouldn't have let him borrow this precious treasure. Right now, he was unleashing this precious treasure to obtain victory in one fell swoop. The water dragon roared, unleashing an astounding might into the surroundings. It was at least at the dividing soul tier. How would Ling Han resist? Everyone shook their heads upon seeing this. To say nothing of severing mundane tier cultivators, even elites at the yang soul of the dividing soul tier wouldn't be able to rival this southern cup rock sun water. However, there was a strange expression on Ling Han's face. This was because a wisp of power had been aroused inside him. The Xianin source water. This was one of the 9 great source waters of the celestial realm. It was the source of all water, and it was the mother of all water. Right now, the Xianin source water was releasing a feeling of greed. It wanted to consume the water dragon. Because the Xianin source water had already become Ling Han's source power, he could clearly determine that he possessed the ability to consume the water dragon. In other words, he possessed the ability to consume the southern cup rock sun water. This was because he belonged to a higher level, thereby allowing him to comprehensively suppress this spiritual matter. Chapter 1776 Stealing. Chapter 1776 Stealing. Is it really alright to pick on people like this? Aren't you afraid that you'll give birth to a son with no show? A voice that was filled with disdain suddenly said. Everyone looked over, only to see a beautiful young woman walking out from the crowd. This was none other than Situ. In fact, one could already determine the owner of this voice without looking over. After all, few women spoke as boldly as this. Lady Xiaojun! Everyone immediately said in greeting upon seeing Situ Xiaojun. Situ Xiaojun was only at the first severance, yet her grandpa was a mighty 3-star alchemist. Thus, this instantly elevated her status by several notches. Even the clan leader of the Fu clan would have to treat a 3-star alchemist with respect. It could be said that only Situ Xiaojun could pick on others, and no one else could pick on her. Otherwise, they would be seeking death. Thus, her interference instantly caused Fu Ziyuan to frown. This was a mini-ancestor. Little girl, why have you run over here? Fu Ziyuan asked with a chuckle. Although he was adopting the position of an elder, he was speaking politely and acting as friendly as he could. Do you have the right to call me little girl? Situ Xiaojun said with a sneer. Old geezer, why don't you take a piss and look at your own reflection? Your face is crooked and repulsive, so stop trying to act all friendly with me. I'm not familiar with you at all. Fu Ziyuan instantly exploded with rage. He had heard about Situ Xiaojun's evil reputation before, yet only after encountering her did he finally realize just how toxic her tongue truly was. However, he didn't dare to unleash his fury. After all, who didn't know that she was Situ Tang's only granddaughter? If anyone dared to pick on her, regardless of whether they were in the right or not, that old man would definitely rush over to personally battle with them. Moreover, it didn't matter how powerful he was. Facing a 3-star alchemist, who dared to touch even a single hair of his. If anyone dared to attack him, the clan leader and the Fu clan would definitely rush over to personally punish them. "Why, you little girl!" Fu Siyuan said with a forced smile. He waved his hand and continued, "All right, enough with the nonsense. This is a fair and evenly matched battle." "Fair? Fair?" Situ Xiaojun said with a cold sneer. Although her tongue was toxic, she was someone who had an overwhelming sense of justice and righteousness. Thus, she would directly speak her mind if she came across anything unjust. She would never hide her emotions. "Ling Han, follow me," she said. "Let me see who dares to target you." Ling Han couldn't help but feel exasperated. He was a huge fan of Situ Xiaojun's sense of justice and righteousness. However, he still wanted to consume that water dragon. Yet, his battle with Fu Zhitong had been forcefully interrupted by her. What could he do now? "There's no need. This is a simple sparring match," he said with a wave of his hand. The Xianin source water was releasing an increasingly powerful urge to consume the Southern Cup Rock Sun water. This was his source power, so in a sense, it also represented the desires of his own body. Situ Xiaojun faltered upon hearing this, and she said, "You stupid fool, that's the Southern Cup Rock Sun water. Moreover, it's already developed intelligence. Did you think it was just an ordinary celestial treasure?" "Nonsense. I only want to consume it because it's the Southern Cup Rock Sun water." Ling Han smiled and said, "I've never seen such a matter before, so I want to experience its power." "You dumb C***NT, Situ Xiaojun said as she flipped the bird at Ling Han. "So be it, do whatever you want. I can't be bothered anymore." After saying this, she ran away in frustration. Everyone was puzzled upon seeing this. Ling Han had the support of Situ Xiaojun, so why didn't he seize the opportunity to decline the battle? Perhaps he was truly a fool. Even Fu Siyuan was slightly confused upon seeing this. He refused to believe that a severing mundane tier cultivator could be so stupid. However, no matter how he racked his brains, he still couldn't figure out how Ling Han would possibly rival the Southern Cup Rock Sun water. Perhaps he possesses powerful spiritual matters such as the Yiksha fire or Sixth Heaven thunder? No way! What a joke! Fu Siyuan pondered for a moment before deciding not to stop Ling Han. They definitely had to win their face back. Otherwise, their branch would suffer great humiliation. Fu Zhitong roared loudly before charging at Ling Han. He couldn't suppress his anger any longer. Boom! The water dragon howled in fury. This was a spiritual matter of heaven and earth, and when it grew up, it could even reach the ascending origin tier. Although it was wounded now, it still possessed the might of a dividing soul tier elite. Moreover, it possessed the great Tao of water that one could investigate and comprehend. As such, this was definitely a paramount treasure. However, it was a shame that it was only at the dividing soul tier, meaning that one couldn't rely on it to comprehend the mystical nature of the immortal palace tier. Otherwise, it would be even more valuable. On the flip side, however, Fu Zhitong wouldn't have been able to borrow this treasure if it had been truly flawless and able to reach the ascending origin tier. After all, such a powerful treasure would definitely attract ascending origin tier forces who might even try to forcefully steal it. The water dragon was unstoppable as it swooped over. Ling Han dashed aside to dodge, and he started to engage in battle with Fu Zhitong. However, the water dragon was far too powerful. After all, it was at the dividing soul tier, and it was perhaps even above the Yang soul. It had potentially reached the Yin soul, or even the Earth soul. Thus, it was inevitable that Ling Han was occasionally struck by the water dragon. Shockingly, however, it was as if Ling Han weren't affected by this at all. He remained calm and composed regardless of how the water dragon wreaked havoc in his surroundings. It was as if the water dragon weren't a dividing soul tier elite, but rather a measly Genesis tier cultivator. Gasp! Everyone was transfixed with shock and disbelief. How could they accept this? Meanwhile, Ling Han was secretly feeling elated. Each time he clashed with the water dragon, he would pluck a wisp of its power of regulations, transforming this into his own power. During this process, his origin power would continue to rise at a steady rate. To Celestials, the accumulation of origin power was already relatively unimportant. However, this was still something that needed to be accumulated over time. As such, why would Ling Han not accept this free origin power? Of course, his most important task was still to strengthen his source power. If Ling Han wanted to comprehend the power of regulations, he could use his own source power to comprehend the regulations of water and the regulations of fire. After all, both of these source powers were already at the Celestial King tier. Would the difficulty of comprehending heaven and earth be equivalent to the difficulty of comprehending one's own power and body? Thus, it could be said that before reaching the Celestial King tier, Ling Han's cultivation speed would be tens of thousands of times quicker than that of other cultivators. This was inevitable. After all, who else would be fortunate enough to refine a source power of heaven and earth? Even when considering celestial kings, few could achieve such a feat. Incredible! This feels absolutely incredible. As they collided, Ling Han continued to extract the water dragon's power. It appeared as if they were engaged in an intense battle, yet in reality, the water dragon was continuously becoming weaker. If the Southern Cup Rock Sun Water had truly developed intelligence, it definitely wouldn't have battled against Ling Han head-on like it was doing now. After all, would it be that foolish? Unfortunately, however, it had been captured by the ancestor while it was at the most critical moment of developing intelligence. That being the case, it could only foolishly battle against Ling Han. It continued to weaken, and Ling Han continued to feel elated. He was brimming with origin power. In fact, if he didn't advance, his dantian would be too small to contain any more heavenly bodies and any more origin power. Stop! Fu Siyuan suddenly shouted. His brows knitted into a frown, and he said to Fu Jingtong, "Attack me with your full power." Fu Jingtong faltered upon hearing this, yet he immediately came to his senses. Indeed, something seemed off. How could the Southern Cup Rock Sun Water be so weak? It couldn't even suppress a measly severing mundane tier cultivator? He brandished the water dragon and attacked Fu Siyuan with his full power. Boom! The water dragon radiated with a powerful might as it gathered the water particles of heaven and earth. However, Fu Siyuan was astonished as he blocked this attack. Although the water dragon's attack appeared powerful, in reality, its destructive power was only at the early stage of the fourth severance. He came to a sudden realization. No wonder Ling Han could rival the power of this water dragon. As it turned out, this was a fake water dragon. Southern Cup Rock Sun Water. Chapter 1777 Invitation from Young Master Hai. Chapter 1777 Invitation from Young Master Hai. Ha ha! The onlookers all roared with laughter. After causing so much commotion and giving them such high hopes for the ensuing battle, Fu Jingtong had immediately become limp and uncompetitive just like that. Meanwhile, Fu Siyuan's expression was as dark as could be. What in the world was going on? Perhaps Fu Jingtong had released the Southern Cup Rock Sun Water for too long, so it was leaking air? Humph! He flicked his sleeves in frustration. If he directly interfered and suppressed Ling Han, others would accuse him of picking on the weak. Sure, there were dividing soul tier elites in Fu Tonghai's branch, but were there no dividing soul tier elites in Fu Gaoyun's branch? The Fu clan had their rules. Battles between the followers of different potential leaders were strictly limited to those at the severing mundane tier. If elites above this cultivation level participated, they would be severely punished by the clan. Let's go! Fu Siyuan said as he turned around. Fu Jingtong hurriedly followed behind him. He was no stronger than Ling Han, and if he took Ling Han's pseudo-celestial tool into account, he could only hope to achieve victory if he used the Southern Cup Rock Sun Water. Otherwise, how could he avenge his defeat? He dejectedly left with Fu Siyuan. A smile spread across Ling Han's face. He had obtained a huge yield. He returned to his courtyard and immediately entered the Black Tower. He then channeled his cultivation technique under the reincarnation tree, refining the brimming origin power into his flesh and bones. Right now, His accumulation of origin power had already reached the peak stage of the second severance. However, his comprehension of regulations was slightly inferior. As such, he was still unable to advance, meaning that he could only patiently wait. 3 different source powers intertwined inside his body: water, fire, and lightning. The water and fire element source powers were both nurtured and birthed by heaven and earth. Meanwhile, the lightning element source power was obtained from heavenly tribulation fluid. As such, it was fundamentally weaker than the 2 other source powers. That being the case, the fire and water element source powers occupied 90% of the territory, while the lightning element source power only occupied 10% of the territory. Ling Han observed the water element source power. After absorbing most of the essence of the southern cup rock sun water, this water element source power had also grown larger by a tiny bit. However, because its level was already so high, this growth seemed to be relatively insignificant. Anyhow, a tiny bit of growth was better than nothing. Perhaps it had only been able to help him reach the first heaven of the Celestial King tier before, yet it was now able to help him reach the second heaven of the Celestial King tier? Of course, this was thinking too far ahead. Ling Han continued to refine the brimming origin power into his blood, flesh, and bones. This was the process of cultivating and tempering his body. Accumulation of origin power would become relatively unimportant after reaching the severing mundane tier, so those who were at this cultivation level would often use their origin power to temper their body. After advancing to the severing mundane tier, it could be said that everyone would become someone who practiced body arts. The only difference was how powerful their physique was. Ling Han stopped and shook his head after refining his origin power for a few hours. Even though there were 2 source powers of heaven and earth within his body, and even though he had the help of the reincarnation tree, it was still incredibly difficult to obtain enough comprehension to advance to the 3rd severance. He would need to wait for at least 1,000 more years. Was this slow? Not at all. For example, Mao Dai was a renowned prodigy, yet it had still taken him a whopping 300 million years to advance from the early stage of the 1st severance to the peak stage of the 3rd severance. Was it possible to advance faster? Of course. One could ingest celestial medicines. Otherwise, one could also enter celestial bath pools like the one in the Han clan. By doing so, one would naturally obtain a steady flow of comprehension. As long as they weren't a fool, their cultivation would naturally rise at an explosive rate. Ling Han sighed with emotion. He already owned numerous paramount treasures, yet if he wanted to rapidly increase his cultivation, he would still need to enter all kinds of ancient sites to look for rare opportunities. He was under far too much pressure. Otherwise, advancing by 1 minor level every 1,000 years was something that even young king tiers like Chang Sun Liang and Fu Gaoyun would accept with glee. They definitely wouldn't view this speed as slow. Meanwhile, Zhao Peng had sought help from a powerful figure of the Zhao clan, and they had desired to heap pressure onto Ling Han. However, Situ Xiaojun informed the 2 3-star alchemists about this, and they both became incredibly displeased. They immediately complained to the clan leader of the Fu clan, and as a result, the Zhao clan was treated as an example and severely admonished by him. Only at this moment did everyone come to a sudden realization. It was untrue that Ling Han didn't have a powerful background. Instead, he had the support of 2 3-star alchemists. Upon learning of this, no one dared to provoke Ling Han anymore. At the same time, it also caused many members of the Fu clan to think highly of Fu Gaoyun. By obtaining the support of Ling Han, he had essentially obtained the support of 2 great alchemists. This was unfathomably important to Fu Gaoyun's aim of stabilizing his position as a potential successor. In fact, it was also a critical relationship that might help him become the only successor of the Fu clan. Several undecided branches and subordinate forces immediately started to lean toward Fu Gaoyun. In turn, this placed huge pressure on the 3 other potential successors. Fu Gaoyun was naturally overjoyed. He had only become acquaintances with Ling Han because he appreciated his personality. At that time, he hadn't known that Ling Han was also a talented alchemist who would bring him such immense help. In order to thank Ling Han, he became even more enthusiastic as he helped him search for level 20 godly metal. At the same time, he also ordered more people to search for the whereabouts of the Rock Palace. With this significant increase in effort, it wasn't long before they obtained some results. Godly metal could be obtained as long as one had enough money. Meanwhile, news about the Rock Palace was also delivered over from the distance. This news had come from a city that was located near the Boundless Sea. It had come from a merchant who had traveled to the Western Celestial Realm. Indeed, Linghan was currently located in the Eastern Celestial Realm, while the Rock Palace was situated in the distant Western Celestial Realm. Linghan was beside himself with emotion upon hearing this news. However, crossing the Boundless Sea was an incredibly dangerous matter. There were countless immortal beasts in the sea. In fact, there were even celestial king-tier immortal beasts in the sea. With Linghan's current strength, attempting to cross the sea would be equivalent to seeking death. He had to follow a merchant team. In other words, he had to pay a huge sum of money to cross the sea. However, Linghan wasn't worried about this cost. Instead, he was worried that money alone wouldn't be enough. No one could guarantee that crossing the sea would be safe. Some powerful forces had opened set routes in the sea, yet even so, they would still tell their passengers that they were liable for their own safety if anything untoward were to happen. If that were to occur, Linghan would have no option but to seek refuge in the Black Tower. Perhaps he might even be met with grave dangers when he poked his head out again. After mulling over this for a long time, Linghan decided to cross the sea after he reached at least the dividing soul tier. Doing so would increase his safety by a significant amount. Moreover, he had also received immense help from Fu Gaoyun, so it would be incredibly discourteous of him to leave at this moment. After all, departing at this moment would definitely lead to the collapse of Fu Gaoyun's newly obtained support. Linghan wasn't someone who would leave things unfinished. Coincidentally, he also wanted to see if he could obtain anything during his trip to the Hidden Dragon Mystery Realm. If he could find a method to rapidly advance to the third severance, advancing to the dividing soul tier wouldn't be a distant matter anymore. Right now, he was waiting for the Hidden Dragon Mystery Realm to open. Meanwhile, elites would occasionally go to the Heavenly Dragon Academy to give lectures on Tao. However, most of them were only at the dividing soul tier. It was extremely rare for Immortal Palace tier elites to give lectures. Linghan would occasionally attend these lectures, and this was mainly to gain an understanding of the dividing soul tier. Similar to the severing mundane tier, one would also need to go to designated locations in the celestial realm to advance to the dividing soul tier. Otherwise, it was essentially impossible to advance to the dividing soul tier. Anyhow, people were forgetful beings, and it wasn't long before the commotion caused by Linghan quickly died down. After all, he had kept an extremely low profile afterward. Moreover, no one dared to provoke him anyway. Right now, there was someone else whom people would involuntarily curse when they mentioned him. This was none other than the large black dog that wore a pair of iron underwear. This large black dog was far too detestable, and he loved to screw people over left and right. He would commit any evils that he could think of. Moreover, he was extremely slippery, and no one could hope to capture him at all. However, it was also because of this that there was an air of mystery about him. He had already become a legend of the academy. To this, Linghan could only shed a few drops of cold sweat. 1 month later, Linghan received a visitor. "Young Master Han, this humble servant is called Lu Huaiyu." This was a stunningly beautiful woman. Moreover, upon seeing her seductive eyes, Linghan felt a strong urge to leap over and push her down, and then furiously enter her body. Linghan's heart shuddered. He had a breathtakingly beautiful wife in the Empress, so what woman could still make him lose his control? This woman had practiced charm techniques, so each of her movements was as charming and seductive as could be. "Young Master Hai sends his invitation," she said in a sweet voice. Chapter 1778 Persuasion. Chapter 1778 Persuasion. Young Master Hai? Fu Tonghai. Linghan came to a sudden understanding. Because of him, Fu Gaoyun was now enjoying an ever-increasing amount of support. Moreover, having the support of 2 3-star alchemists was far too mighty and impressive. It was also because of this that Fu Tonghai was unable to remain calm. If this continued, Fu Gaoyun would definitely become the legitimate successor to the position of clan leader. Ling Han smiled and replied, I'm not familiar with Fu Tonghai, am I? How are you not? Lu Huayu asked with a charming and dainty smile. Her smile was as beautiful as 100 flowers in full blossom. Moreover, her charm techniques were extremely high level, and they didn't rely on her selling her body or physically seducing others. Just her movements and her smiles were enough to charm one to the extreme. As long as you can converse, there will naturally be something to talk about, she said. She twirled her hair, revealing a small portion of her smooth and jade-like ear. However, she immediately released her hair to cover it again, and this would make one's mind become itchy with thirst. Ling Han shook his head, saying, Yeah, maybe not. Young Master Han, are you trying to make things difficult for this humble servant? Lu Huayu said with an aggrieved expression. Her expression not only elicited sympathy, but it would also rile one's lust. Upon seeing her expression, one would feel a strong urge to grab her body and toy with her beautiful and voluptuous curves. However, Ling Han was completely unfazed. Lu Huayu's charm techniques were indeed powerful, and they perfectly complemented the natural charm of her body. However, he faced the Empress every day, so how could he not endure this kind of temptation? He smiled and said, Lady Lu, please return. Young Master Han, are you afraid that your 2 wives will be jealous? Lu Huayu asked with a silvery laugh. She covered her dainty mouth, and she continued, With young Master Han's godly talent, it won't be excessive even if you have 200 wives, to say nothing of 2 wives. Moreover, her eyes were filled with seduction and she said, We still haven't done anything, yet. Her words were filled with ambiguity and temptation. They still hadn't done anything yet, so did this mean that they would do something later? Ling Han waved his hand, saying, Servants, see this visitor away. Lu Huayu hurriedly dashed over and exclaimed, Young Master Han. She grabbed his arm and lightly swayed it. She then leaned her slender body onto him, and she said, Don't be so heartless. If it's necessary, this humble servant will do anything that you ask. Her eyes were filled with pity, and her lips were as red as flames. It was as if she could be easily sparked by others. Ling Han could clearly feel the firmness of Lu Huayu's breasts through his arm, yet he still resolutely pulled it away from her embrace. Show this guest the door. Young Master Han. Lu Huayu exclaimed. Her expression faltered, and she immediately wiped the charming expression from her face. At this moment, her expression was filled with seriousness, and it was as if she were an inviolable maiden. This transformation was far too quick, so much so that Ling Han could barely come to his senses. Young Master Han, as the saying goes, it's in man's nature to strive for better, Lu Huayu said with a smile. She was still smiling, yet her smile didn't give off a shred of charm anymore. The transformation of her aura was simply astounding. As the saying also goes, a fine fowl perches only on a fine tree. Although Fu Gaoyun's reputation is rising, how can he compare to the profound potential and experience of young Master Hai? If young Master Han allies with young Master Hai, that will be an alliance between giants. At that time, the position of future clan leader will definitely go to young Master Hai. Moreover, young Master Hai has also agreed to designate young Master Han as his first subordinate force at that time. In fact, young Master Hai will even allow you to build your own city. Building his own city, this was quite a hefty promise. Of course, Fu Tonghai's promises were one matter, and whether he fulfilled them was another matter altogether. Making empty promises was extremely easy and common. There was definitely no shortage of people who went back on their word. Anyhow, Lu Huayu's words were extremely colorful and extravagant. Ling Han grinned and said, I'm destined to become a celestial king in the future. So are you perhaps underestimating my value? Lu Huayu was stunned upon hearing this. She had come across overconfident people before, and she had also come across those who made arrogant claims because they wanted to impress her. Compared to Ling Han, however, their claims were absolutely pathetic. Becoming a celestial king? Gasp! Celestial kings were the most powerful beings in the celestial realm. Just a single shadow of theirs could crush heaven and earth. These were paramount beings the prodigies and king tiers could only look up to. In fact, even as supremely talented as he was, Fu Tonghai only dared to set a goal of reaching the immortal palace tier. Perhaps his luck would be explosive, and he might even have a chance to advance to the ascending origin tier in the future. However, the celestial king tier? He wouldn't dare to even dream of this. Even among holy sons and holy daughters of top-notch sects who had limitless amounts of resources to burn, only fewer than 1 in 10,000 of them would ultimately succeed in becoming a celestial king. Celestials possessed a limitless lifespan, and celestial kings were more so the most powerful beings in the world. According to rumors, they could extinguish their immortal's tribulation with a wave of their hand. These beings were invincible and undying. Even so, only extremely few of them existed in the world. Why was this? This was because it was far too difficult to become a celestial king. Perhaps a new celestial king would only appear once every 100 billion years or 1 trillion years. Thus, Lu Huayu would have simply chuckled in reply if Ling Han had made any other bold claim. However, claiming that he would become a celestial king? She couldn't laugh even if she wanted to. In the celestial realm, celestial kings represented paramount might and invincibility. If one couldn't reach this height, then they could only gaze up in respect and reverence. Lu Huayu faltered for a long while before eventually stammering, "Young Master Han, what an incredible aspiration!" However, her words definitely weren't that of praise. Ling Han was only a measly first severance junior, and he only had the support of 2 3-star alchemists. Yet, he was actually boasting that he would become a celestial king. If word of this spread, others would definitely treat him as if he were an utter fool. Ling Han's voice was calm, and he said, "If Fu Tonghai can help me reach the celestial king tier, I won't mind going over to meet him. Otherwise, don't waste my time." Holy sh*t. Lu Huayu almost slapped him in the face. If Fu Tonghai knew how to become a celestial king, would he still give a toss about becoming the clan leader of the Fu clan? 100 million positions of clan leader wouldn't be worth the position of celestial king. She was truly rendered speechless. When others talked business, they all asked for exorbitant benefits while eventually settling for decent prices. However, Ling Han's request was simply astronomical. How could she reply to him? "Then, this humble servant will ask for young Master Hai's instructions," Lu Huayu said. She finally stood up to leave, and her expression was slightly flustered. This was the first time that she had become so flustered before a man, and this was also the first time that she had failed to convince her target. This was a crushing blow, and she couldn't help but suspect that her charm had weakened. 2 hours later, another person came to visit. This person was none other than Fu Tonghai, one of the 4 potential successors of the Fu clan. He was a charming man, and he was brimming with the demeanor of a king tier. Women would definitely be attracted by him, and men would definitely be impressed by him. "I'm Fu Tonghai," he introduced with a loud laugh as he entered Ling Han's courtyard. Ling Han nodded in reply, saying, "Brother Hai. Brother Ling, you're a man of great aspirations, and coincidentally, so am I. Why don't we team up to build a beautiful future?" There was eager anticipation on Fu Tonghai's face as he gazed at Ling Han, and his warm enthusiasm was such that he could easily soften others and cause them to impulsively agree to his requests. It was no wonder that even a seductively charming woman like Lu Huayu was willing to serve him. His demeanor and presence were truly outstanding. Chapter 1779 Fu Tonghai. Chapter 1779 Fu Tonghai. Ling Han looked at Fu Tonghai again. If he was being honest, this man indeed had a very strong personal charisma, only then would he be able to easily gather the hearts of others. If Ling Han was not a man that was determined to become the strongest in this world, there really might be a possibility that he would be moved, and follow this man and answer his every beck and call, serving him faithfully. However, his aspirations were higher than the heavens, so how could he possibly become someone else's follower? Even in the case of Fu Gaoyun, his relation with Ling Han was only that of friends, and not the relation between a superior and subordinate. But who would believe that? Someone in a superior position had no need for friends. Even if they treated someone very well for the sake of winning their loyalty, at the essence, that was still treating the latter as a subordinate, and not as someone who was their equal. Fu Tonghai could not see through this. Thus, he wished to recruit Ling Han at all costs, yet did not know that this could not possibly succeed, and would only cause dislike to sprout in Ling Han's heart. Ling Han smiled calmly. I am a man with no great ambitions, and only wish to spend my life peacefully. I am afraid I can only disappoint Brother Hai's expectations. Utter crap. What were your words to Lu Huayu? Weren't you planning to become a celestial king? And now you've become a man with no great ambitions? Whom are you trying to deceive? Fu Tonghai's expression involuntarily darkened. Faced with such a stubborn guy like Ling Han, he also felt weary. But Ling Han was too crucial, and directly influenced the inclinations of two great alchemists. If he could not manage to get Ling Han over to his side, then it might really be impossible to stop Fu Gaoyun from ascending to the position of the Patriarch. It definitely couldn't happen. He tried persuading him again, promised rich rewards, and even used Lu Huayu as his bargaining chip. As long as Ling Han nodded, he could consider gifting such an enchanting, seductive beauty to Ling Han as his concubine. Ling Han's heart involuntarily became filled with disdain. Being able to treat a woman, especially a subordinate that had admired him so long, as a good to be gifted to others meant this person's nature was truly cold. In Fu Tonghai's eyes there was nothing that was as important as the position of the Patriarch. For the sake of rising to this position, there was nothing he could not sacrifice or give up. That was because he could get anything that he had given up 1,000 or 10,000 times back in future. Now, Fu Tonghai could give Lu Huayu to him, and in future, he could also take her back. In fact, if he had other daughters, wives, or the sort, he could take them as well because he could already get rid of him when he was no longer useful. Originally, Ling Han had no intention to have any kind of relations with him, and now his heart was filled with dislike for him. He calmly stated, I am a little tired, please return. Fu Tonghai's expression became incredibly dark in a flash. He had never been dismissed like this straight to his face. Usually, he would be the one who would be ending a conversation, waving a hand to dismiss others, but now it was he that was being dismissed by another in this manner? It should be known that no matter how impressive you were still just a dog of the Fu clan. This point was applicable to all the subordinate clans and subjects of the Fu clan. Even great alchemists like Situ Tang and Xiang Yan were no exception. Though Fu clan presently treated these two with incomparable respect, and even the Lord Patriarch had to carefully accompany them, the moment the essential profits of the Fu clan were involved, they would definitely give them up without the slightest hesitation. I've just given you a few compliments, and you really think that you are someone important? Fu Tonghai smirked coldly inside his heart. This guy had to have been horribly spoilt by Fu Gaoyun. He really had no idea just how much Fu Gaoyun had sacrificed to be able to recruit this guy under his banner. He immediately made his decision. He would definitely investigate Fu Gaoyun's accounts. If he had sacrificed the benefits of the clan just for the sake of having Ling Han by his side, then he would report him. If it was serious, Fu Gaoyun's status as heir would immediately be removed. Additionally, he looked at Ling Han with a smile and asked, Brother Han, you are going to the Hidden Dragon Mystery Realm as well, right? Ling Han nodded and said, Correct. I have been there before, so why don't I tell you about it first, Brother Han? There are many dangers in this Hidden Dragon Mystery Realm, and the slightest carelessness could lead to one losing his life. Thus, be careful, very careful. He clapped a hand on Ling Han's shoulder, seeming as if he was giving advice to Ling Han, when in truth, his words were filled with threat. The Hidden Dragon Mystery Realm was too dangerous. Every time it opened, the number of people who died inside were uncountable. You are but a mere second severance, so it would be a very normal thing for you to die inside. Ling Han chuckled. Since this guy was already planning to turn hostile, he did not want to bother to keep up appearances either. He waved him off. I have always been a fortunate man, so there is no need for you to worry about me. Then, pray that you have good luck. Fu Tonghai turned around to leave, his expression becoming incredibly cold and sinister in an instant. He had already decided that he would have his subordinates put all effort into hunting down Ling Han and killing him after they had entered into the hidden dragon mystery realm. In any case, it was a mystery realm. As long as there were no eyewitnesses, who cared if there were a few deaths? Furthermore, Bei Xianming was on poor terms with this person as well. Previously, he had even wanted to make use of him to teach Ling Han a lesson. If they had entered into the hidden dragon mystery realm, how could he keep himself from making a move on Ling Han with such a good chance in front of him? There were too many elites in the lunar sect. Though some of them had not become holy sons and holy daughters, their talent was extremely high, and they had cultivated for who knew how many hundreds of millions of years in the severing mundane tier, hoping to be well prepared. Anyways, there was no longer any limit to their lifespan after advancing into the severing mundane tier, and with how long the path of cultivation was, there was absolutely no need to compete to see who was faster or slower. This kind of person was extremely frightening. It was possible that their battle prowess was a considerable number of times stronger than even that of the holy sons and holy daughters in the same cultivation level. Fu Tonghai was sure that Bei Xianming definitely had no lack of such elites that would follow alongside him into the hidden dragon mystery realm with his identity. Then, as long as he encountered Ling Han, the latter would definitely die without a doubt. That's right, there is also the Shao clan, and the Han clan as well. Fu Tonghai suddenly recalled that Ling Han was really a troublemaker. He was only in the severing mundane tier, but he had actually offended a great many 2-star and 3-star forces. The fact that he managed to continue living until today was practically a miracle. However, the miracle will be ending now because this time I, Fu Tonghai, will be organizing everything. His killing intent soared. The fate of anyone who was not useful to him naturally was death. Who asked Ling Han to be too useful such that he directly affected the balance of power between the 4 great heirs. Even if I don't make a move, the other 2 probably wouldn't be able to remain calm, either. A sliver of a cold smirk appeared at the corners of Fu Tonghai's lips. He was referring to Fu Xiuping and Fu Bingbing. How could these 2 people not be anxious as well? They had to be anxious. It was just that they should be aware that they could not compete with Fu Gaoyun, and thus simply chose not to recruit Ling Han at all. Wouldn't it be even better to directly kill this guy in the hidden dragon mystery realm with a trap? And that would end the matter once and for all. Ling Han, if you still manage to escape this time around, I will take your surname. He turned his head and glanced at the manor behind him. Then, taking a step forwards with a flutter of his sleeve, he disappeared without a trace. In the main hall, Ling Han was rubbing his chin, feeling slightly wrong. Initially, he had not planned to do anything special when he had come to the Fu clan. His main motive was merely to investigate the whereabouts of the Rock Palace. Why had so many things happened for no reason like this? So strange. Don't think about it. You are just a magnet for trouble. If nothing happened when you went somewhere, that would be truly strange indeed. The heavenly phoenix divine maiden walked to his side, leaning against him. Ling Han wrapped his wife in his arms, smelling the perfume in her hair, and asked, "How can anyone say that about her husband?" The heavenly phoenix divine maiden giggled. Being married to such a man, there was really no need to worry about the lack of color in one's life. Life was always so exciting. "I want it," she said softly by Ling Han's ear, her voice incredibly seductive. Chapter 1780 Purity Sect. Chapter 1780 Purity Sect. Time passed quickly, and in the blink of an eye, another 3 months had passed. In this period of time, no other members of the Fu clan came to create trouble for Ling Han. As he thought about it, they should be focusing all their killing intent on the hidden dragon mystery realm. Ling Han was unafraid. At present, though he was still unable to defeat an opponent at the peak stage of the 4th severance, his physique was really too strong. Even if a peak stage of 4th severance suddenly ambushed him, he could not possibly kill him with a single strike, and there were so many trump cards in his possession: the 9 heavens flame, Xianin source water, 10 beasts technique, and so on. Which one of them was any ordinary technique? There was an entry restriction in the Hidden Dragon Mystery Realm. Ling Han simply felt that it was a playground specially ready for him, and he only had to concern himself with traveling at his ease. Chan Sun Liang, Shaoxing, and the others had come even later than Ling Han. They entered the Heavenly Dragon Academy as well, but they were unable to obtain the qualification to enter into the Hidden Dragon Mystery Realm. At least this time, they would not have the chance to enter. Ling Han couldn't help but feel rueful. When they were in the Black Moon Sect and Shao clan, which one of them was not an unrivaled prodigious king tier? But now, they weren't even able to get an entry slot. No wonder others said that it was better to be a big fish in a small pond rather than a small fish in a big pond. After he and Chang Sun Liang met once, he boarded a battleship belonging to the Fu clan, getting ready to set out towards the Hidden Dragon Mystery Realm. A battleship had been dispatched this time, which showed how much regard the Fu clan had for this journey. That was because there were only 3 such vessels in the entire Fu clan, and each battleship possessed the battle prowess of the peak stage of the Immortal Palace tier, and was one of the strongest trump cards of the Fu clan. The battleship set out, and aside from encountering an elite of the Ascending Origin tier, anyone who dared make a move on it rashly would definitely be turned into bits by the heavy cannons that the vessel was armed with. There were many people on the ship, forming a considerable number of small circles. For example, Ling Han naturally would be together with Fu Gaoyun, and aside from the 10 of them, there were 2 other people. One of them was Fu Xiaoyun. It was very normal for her to be here. As Fu Gaoyun's younger sister, whom was she going to follow if not Fu Gaoyun? And the other was Situ Xiaojun. She was the only granddaughter of a 3-star alchemist, so how easy would it be for her to get hold of an entry slot? And before setting out, the 2 great alchemists had called Fu Gaoyun over, telling him to take good care of Situ Xiaojun. Otherwise, they would really burst his N*TS, and guarantee that they would never grow back again. This scared Fu Gaoyun horribly. The 2 great alchemists were definitely not just speaking idle threats. Thus, there was another boss in this room of theirs, and she was indeed a boss. Her mouth was filled with crude words as she teased Fu Gaoyun at one moment, and she would be teasing Fu Xiaoyun in the next, being outrageously brazen. Ling Han and the Empress did not mingle with them, and locked themselves in their rooms. Then, they entered into the Black Tower, and began comprehending Tao underneath the reincarnation tree. They wanted to increase their strength as much as possible. The ship's speed was astonishing. Only a mere month later, it had already arrived at the Hidden Dragon Mystery Realm. This region was a complete wilderness enshrouded in layers of mysterious fog, and the Hidden Dragon Mystery Realm lay within. It was said that there was no fog inside. This was a formation that had been laid down by a great sect all those years ago, and it was now incomplete, with its destructive power greatly reduced. There was only a little bit of fog rising in the surroundings, which could only cause confusion, but did not have much destructive power. The true killing intent lay within the mystery realm. The aura and regulations had been left behind by elites in that great war all those years ago, and did not disperse even after uncountable years had passed, being astonishingly terrifying. Someone had deduced that this could possibly have been a Celestial King tier-level great sect all those years ago, yet the reason why it had fallen into decline would remain an unsolved mystery. Though the only protective measure left behind to guard the mystery realm was the confusion formation, it still could not be underestimated. Rashly barging in could possibly lead to getting lost. Though one would have managed to enter into the mystery realm, if he encountered chaotic regulations wreaking havoc, that would mean an insta-kill. Thus, they definitely had to enter through the main entrance, reducing the risk as much as possible. After coming to this place, the battleships slowly descended. There was not just a single battleship anchored here, but rather at least 10 of them, and different flags were hung on every single vessel. They were also painted in different colors. But strangely, aside from that, these battleships all looked practically the same. After Ling Han asked Fu Gaoyun, he found out that these battleships were not built by the forces themselves, but were rather purchased from outside. Massive military pavilion! This was a 4-star force, yet unlike other great sects and clans, which used battles to expand their territory, they did business, and what they sold were various types of weapons from small-sized swords and bows all the way to large battleships. They were able to forge any kind of battle weapon. The wealth accumulated by the massive military pavilion was enough to cause envy, but there was definitely no force that dared to feel covetous desire towards this wealth. This was a 4-star force. Furthermore, the massive military pavilion earned their profits through selling battle weapons, and they possessed hundreds of ascending origin tier-level battleships. Who dared to rashly start a war with them? Aside from celestial kings, there really was no one that dared to bully them. Lu clan, Beiyu clan, Qianzhao clan, Ting clan, Ancient Rain Sect. Purity Sect! Fu Gaoyun's eyes swept over the gathered masses, and would pause slightly over each battleship, and reveal their origins. When he counted the 6th battleship, he paused for a slightly longer moment, and a strange expression appeared on his face. It was a mix of wariness and longing. I never thought that the Purity Sect would have come this time as well. Cheng Zhong's expression was also a little ugly. Ling Han was puzzled and asked, Is this force very powerful? Very strong and very troublesome. Fu Gaoyun shook his head. The Purity Sect only accepts female disciples, and all the members of the sect are specialized in the art of seduction. Their opinion is that any problem that could be solved through seduction definitely should not be solved through battle. However, their art of seduction is really very strong, and one would fall for it unconsciously. He sighed. Cheng Zhong laughed loudly. Our young Master Yun is a man who has tender feelings for the fairer sex. Years ago, he discovered a celestial medicine that had just taken form in a mystery realm, and it could be considered extremely valuable. In the end, though, there was also a holy daughter of the Purity Sect there at the time. She enticed our young Master Yun, and compelled our young Master Yun to surrender that celestial medicine to her readily. Fu Gaoyun involuntarily showed a hint of embarrassed ire, but it was more of an expression of infatuation, as if he was still remembering that holy daughter's tenderness. When he returned to the clan, young Master Yun was harshly reprimanded, and almost lost his succession rights. However, young Master Yun is not the only one who has experienced loss at the hands of the Purity Sect. Putting aside our Fu clan, even when it comes to the Lunar Sect, whose strength is top grade, their holy son has not experienced just a few losses like this, either. Cheng Zhong continued, redeeming a little pride for Fu Gaoyun. Fu Gaoyun's expression became serious, and he said, Brother Ling, you must not be careless. The art of seduction of the Purity Sect has long surpassed primitive asterisk, and has advanced to a kind of bearing that will make you unconsciously feel mercy and willingness to sacrifice everything in order to protect the user. He paused, and then continued, Lu Huayu belonged to the Purity Sect. However, she is only a discarded disciple. Only now did Ling Han become serious. Lu Huayu was actually just a discarded disciple. It should be known that her art of seduction was already very advanced, and even he sat up and took notice. Going by the look of things, just how frightening were the members of the Purity Sect in the art of seduction, and how strong was the level of mastery of a holy daughter at it. The Purity Sect is different from other forces. They only have a single holy daughter whose name is Ro. No one knows what her surname is, but all address her as Bewitching Maiden Ro, or rather Fairy Ro. There is a legend that says if one could find out her surname, he would be able to become her doubt partner. Because of this legend, it is unknown how many people have investigated everywhere, which shows how extraordinary and bewitching Maiden Ro is. Fu Gaoyun showed a hint of yearning. In the past, he had spent a short while with Bewitching Maiden Ro, and this also became the most beautiful memory in his life. Even if he had lost the celestial medicine for the sake of it, he did not regret it in the slightest. Ling Han, though, was filled with a sliver of curiosity. He wanted to see this Bewitching Maiden Ro, and find out how astonishing her charms were. Chapter 1781 Flame Control Technique. Chapter 1781 Flame Control Technique. The Fu clan had a king tier-level heir like Fu Gaoyun, so how could other forces not? Aside from Bewitching Maiden Ro of the Purity Sect, There was also Qian Zhao Tian of Qian Zhao clan, Beiyu Xiong of Beiyu clan, Lin Fang of the Ancient Rain Sect, and so on. All of them were king tiers of the present generation, prodigies that had attained a flawless severance. There were some among them that had just advanced to the severing mundane tier, but there were also some that were already supreme king tiers that had reached the peak stage of the fourth severance, their battle prowess being the strongest beneath the dividing soul tier. Though Ling Han was confident, his present battle prowess could only match a normal severance at the early stage of the fourth severance. Middle stage was forcing it a little, and he would definitely be no match for an opponent in the late stage, what more someone at the peak stage who had achieved a flawless severance. Not a match, but it was not so much that he would lose. His physique was the true basis of his strength. Hopefully I don't come into conflict with them, especially that bewitching maiden, Fu Gaoyun forced out through gritted teeth. Yet, unknowingly, he showed a sliver of longing in his expression. Clearly, this was still an image that had yet to be erased from his heart. Qianzhao Tian is here, Fairy Ro, could you please grant me an audience? A person suddenly leaped out of the battleship, and stood proudly in midair. This drew the curiosity of others. The name of Bewitching Maiden Ro could be claimed to be known all throughout the world. Putting aside the fact that juniors would be curious about her charms, there were many that wished to keep her as mistress even among the senior generation. There was a legend that said that Bewitching Maiden Ro was the most outstanding holy daughter of the Purity Sect in history, and was also the most enchanting one at the same time. Even the present sect leader of the Purity Sect, Nansuyu's beauty was slightly inferior to hers. It should be known that when Nansuyu had been a holy daughter, she had been known as the highest fairy. Even a great many prodigies of 4-star forces had fallen in love with her, though not one had managed to win her heart. And even now, when there were more than 100 3-star forces around them, Nansuyu was still firmly holding on to the position of the most beautiful woman, and only now did it seem like Bewitching Maiden Ro was about to replace her. She was more beautiful than even Nansuyu, so how enchanting could she be? Thus, as long as one had an interest in the area of romantic relations, what elite did not want to capture Bewitching Maiden Ro, and keep her as mistress? More importantly, how enticing were the words, Bewitching Maiden. Who did not want to give it a shot personally? At first, no sound emerged from the Purity Sect's battleship. After a while, a woman in white stood at the bow of the ship. She was as beautiful as a divine fairy, and had a kind of bearing that could make one's heart flutter, and uncontrollably wish to give his all to her. This is Bewitching Maiden Ro? She is indeed breathtakingly exquisite, astonishingly beautiful, and very bewitching. PFF, you people really have too little insight. How could this possibly be her? Bewitching Maiden Ro is 100 times more beautiful than she is, and 10,000 times more bewitching than her. I am really about to die laughing. Ling Han nodded internally. Though this woman in white was also very beautiful and bewitching, compared to Lu Huayu, she could only be considered slightly superior. If even this could have made Fu Gaoyun incapable of forgetting about her, reaching the point of even surrendering a celestial medicine to her willingly, then Fu Gaoyun's tastes would have been really a bit too low. And it would have been very simple if Fu Tonghai had wanted to deal with him. He would only have had to send Lu Huayu, and she could have completely entranced Fu Gaoyun to the point of forgetting himself with a little effort. The woman in white opened her mouth, her voice crisp and extremely enchanting. Our holy daughter has said that she is presently studying a secret technique from an ancient period. However, the secret technique is incomplete, and she is unable to distinguish it completely. If young Master Qianzhao wishes to see our holy daughter, you will have to decode these incomplete chants, and then the holy daughter would definitely treat you as an esteemed guest. Qianzhao Tian paused slightly, then laughed loudly and said, All right, I accept this challenge. This was a test from Bewitching Maiden Ro. Without you having enough comprehension ability and innovation, she wasn't even willing to spare the time to see you. And this was also a test that was targeted at the heir of a clan. If it had been anyone else, it was probable that even this woman in white could not possibly have emerged. The others also felt an inclination and approached, similarly saying that they were willing to accept this challenge. The woman in white seemed to have been long since prepared. Adn drew out a thick stack of papers. She would distribute one to each person that approached. Fu Gaoyun could not help himself, and went to collect a piece too. When he returned, he said, "I am purely interested in the ancient technique only and want to solve it. It's not because I want to meet that so-called bewitching Maiden Row." Everyone chuckled. Who would believe that? You fucking have an expression that says you are dying to meet your dream lover. Fu Gaoyun did not think quietly and earnestly on his own either. Instead, he had someone write down the incomplete chant again and distributed it to the rest, gathering everyone's intelligence to help him solve the problem. Ling Han also approached for a look. This was indeed an incomplete technique, and there were a total of 10 verbal chants. 7 of them were complete, while the remaining 3 were incomplete. The empty spots had been marked with circles, every letter was represented with a circle, and the most incomplete chant even had a total of 7 circles. Something like technique involved one's grasp and use of regulations. The slightest carelessness could cause one to suffer a self-injury, so not even one letter could be allowed to be wrong. Otherwise, it would only be seeking one's own death. This was very similar to a pill recipe, and just how many years had Situ Tang and Xian Yan spent to restore a 3-star ancient pill recipe? More than 100 million years! Furthermore, one only had to see whether the alchemical pill had been successfully refined to know if a pill recipe had been restored correctly. It was a different story for a cultivation technique. If you cultivated wrong, then you could possibly become mad. In the best case scenario, it could cause damage to your life force, and in the worst case, you could directly set off on your way to the underworld. Ling Han immediately showed a hint of surprise because he realized that when his eyes swept over that chant on the piece of paper, the 9 heavens flame released a powerful flicker. What was going on? This is a flame control technique, and that is why it has drawn out the 9 heavens flame. Small Tower suddenly spoke up. It is one matter for you to obtain the source power of the heaven and earth, but exactly how much might you can release is another story. Ling Han nodded. This was like how 2 people were similarly in the Genesis tier, but one had stronger comprehension ability of cultivation, and could release 100% of his strength, while the other could only release 70%. There would be a very significant gap in battle prowess of the 2. It was the same for the 9 heavens flame. At present, Ling Han could only either release the 9 heavens flame or instill it in a certain technique, but he had not purposely developed a secret technique for the sole purpose of using the 9 heavens flame. The ancestral flames of the heaven and earth had not just appeared now. Furthermore, he was definitely not the only person who had gained an ancestral flame. Clearly, there had long since been others among the worthy predecessors that had captured the 9 heavens flame before, and had developed a secret technique according to its unique traits. The 9 heavens flame is an ancestral flame and the source of all fire. This flame control technique has astonishing value to anyone that cultivates the element of fire, enough to improve their grasp and control of the fire element of the heaven and earth a great amount. Small Tower judged and then said, "You must get hold of this secret technique." Without these words from it, Ling Han had already decided to take a peek. However, this was only an incomplete chant, and was furthermore presently in someone else's possession. It was not something that could be gotten hold of just because he said so. Ling Han studied these chants in detail, and a strange thing happened. When he read the few complete chants, and then came to the incomplete chants, those multiple gaps actually became letters, automatically restoring the chants. He had a feeling that this was absolutely correct. This 9 heavens flame actually has a connection with the person who has invented these chants. Small Tower said with some surprise. Chapter 1782 Restoring the Chants. Chapter 1782 Restoring the Chants. What do you mean? Ling Han asked. There are a total of 9 ancestral flames in the celestial realm. In theory, this number would not change. If any of the ancestral flames is extinguished, only then would the heaven and earth give rise to a new ancestral flame. Small Tower began to explain. According to my deduction, an elite managed to capture the 9 heavens flame all those years ago, and created a flame control technique. However, this elite later died, and the Nine Heavens flame was also extinguished. Yet, there was a sliver of the Nine Heavens flame that remained, and after innumerable years, it began to burn again, becoming the new Nine Heavens flame. Because this is only a remaining sliver, the flame control technique from years ago is still branded on it, but it is possibly no longer complete. However, through reference to this secret technique, it finally formed a complete technique again. This was very logical. Otherwise, it could not be explained how Ling Han could have seen the chant that should not have existed. Unfortunately, this was only a single piece of paper that contained a mere 10 verbal chants. A thought flashed in Ling Han's head. It looked like he definitely had to meet this bewitching Maiden Ro. On the other side, Fu Gaoyun and the others were all scrambling their brains, thinking hard. Putting aside the fact that Fu Gaoyun had kept bewitching Maiden Ro in his mind all this while, the others were also filled with anticipation, wanting to see for themselves just how exquisite and enchanting bewitching Maiden Ro was. This was a great beauty that was filled with legend, a beautiful witch, and an exquisite femme fatale. Ling Han shook his head secretly. Anyone that was capable of capturing the Nine Heavens flame, aside from someone very lucky like him, had to be a celestial king tier to be able to accomplish this feat, and one that could create a secret technique that could control the ancestral flame could only be a celestial king without a doubt. You guys were merely a few severing mundane tiers. If they actually managed to restore the incomplete technique of a celestial king tier, he really would refuse to believe it. Even if they were already standing on the shoulder of a giant, and had a ready chant which they could study, the difficulty level of this task was like reaching for the heavens. Putting aside them, even if it was a few celestial kings, they would have to spend immeasurable time to be able to completely restore this incomplete chant. Furthermore, it might not be the same as the original either. As Ling Han deduced it, bewitching Maiden Ro had also obtained this technique accidentally, and had completely no idea how valuable it was. Otherwise, she would definitely not have dared to take it out to be studied by everyone. If this was discovered by someone who actually knew what it was, it would be enough reason to spark off a war. Thankfully, there were only 10 verbal chants, and that was not enough to distinguish the fact that this was actually a celestial king technique. Ling Han did not immediately speak up. This was too freakish, wasn't it? You knew what the incomplete parts of the chant were just from a single glance? Were you planning to scare the others to death? 3 days passed, and not a single person could think through what the incomplete technique was. In fact, they couldn't even fill in a single letter. Otherwise, if it was placed together with the other chants, they would probably be treated with disdain. At this time, Ling Han finally took out the incomplete chant that had the blanks filled in, and handed it to Fu Gaoyun so that he could bring it over to the Purity Sect. Will this work? Fu Gaoyun was unsure. Though he admired Ling Han very much, so many prodigies had not had the slightest bit of advancement after so many days, and you actually declared that you had solved it completely? It naturally would cause doubt. Ling Han broke into a smile and said, "Even if it's wrong, it's fine, right? Anyways, isn't it just an attempt?" When Fu Gaoyun thought about it, this was reasonable. Thus, he took the incomplete chant, and ran over to the Purity Sect's battleship to hand it in. However, nothing was heard even after half a day had passed. Fu Gaoyun naturally thought that it had not passed, so could only sigh despondently, and continue the struggle. He earnestly began to study again. But it was just at this time that the woman in white that had appeared a few days ago came over elegantly to ask for an audience. After she was granted permission, she delicately bowed to Fu Gaoyun, and said, "Young Master Fu, our holy daughter invites you over." It really passed? Fu Gaoyun was stunned for a moment, and then immediately overjoyed. He hurriedly nodded and said, "Yes. Yes. Yes." At this moment, he did not have the slightest bit of reservedness. "Count me in," Ling Han said with a smile. He had helped Fu Gaoyun because he wanted to see the full flame control technique. The woman in white immediately showed a hint of displeasure. "Who the hell are you?" Fu Gaoyun was also stuck in a dilemma. Being able to get an invitation from bewitching Maiden Ro was already an incredible honor, so how could he bring himself to express the desire to bring someone else along with him? But the issue here was that this problem had actually been resolved by Ling Han, so how could he kick him to the curb now that he's outlived his usefulness? A thought moved in Ling Han's head, and he said, I have been abrupt. Consider that I have not said anything. The fact that Bewitching Maiden Ro would invite Fu Gaoyun over had to be because she wanted him to continue restoring the incomplete technique. Did Fu Gaoyun have this ability? In the end, they would still come back to beg him. Of course, if this cultivation technique really only had 3 chants that were incomplete, Ling Han could only resign himself to his poor luck. In future, he would have to think of some way to get the full cultivation technique from the hands of Bewitching Maiden Ro. Fu Gaoyun instantly breathed a sigh of relief. He was really afraid that Ling Han would insist, but he did not want to damage the relations between himself and Ling Han. Otherwise, he would really be willing not to visit Bewitching Maiden Ro instead. He knew the importance of this matter, or he would not have been qualified to become one of the 4 heirs of the Fu clan in the first place. The woman in white glanced coldly at Ling Han, expressing a strong disdain. She did not make sound, and led Fu Gaoyun towards the battleship of the Purity Sect. Ling Han crossed his legs, unconcerned. He had a card up his sleeve. After waiting a few hours, that woman in white had indeed returned, and so did Fu Gaoyun. His forehead was covered in sweat, and he looked a little embarrassed. Ling Han could guess that Bewitching Maiden Ro had to have taken out the incomplete Celestial King technique, and asked Fu Gaoyun to continue restoring the technique. But how could Fu Gaoyun possibly have that kind of ability? He could only reveal the truth. Thus, he was naturally embarrassed as he had taken the credit for someone else's effort. Brother Ling, come, let's go and meet Fairy Ro together, Fu Gaoyun called out the moment he came in. Ling Han shook his head, and replied, Not interested. Why are you uninterested now? Previously, didn't you say yourself that you wanted to go? Though people were prone to change, you changed a little too quickly, hadn't you? Our holy daughter has invited you, and you're putting on airs? The woman in white asked without being the slightest bit reserved. She had seen who knew how many young king tears, but any of them would immediately scramble over when they heard that they were summoned by Bewitching Maiden Ro, and would always treat her very politely. Are you the heir of a noble clan? Are you the holy son of a great sect? And you are actually putting on airs, you really have no awareness of your own status. Ling Han did not even raise his head, and only waved a dismissive hand. He said, Just going by this attitude of yours, ho-ho. We'll speak again when you have understood what kind of attitude should be maintained when you have a request to make. Realization dawned on Fu Gaoyun. No wonder Ling Han had changed so suddenly. As it turned out, he had been irked by this woman in white. He communicated a message through divine sense. Brother Ling, don't fall to the same level as this woman. What if you overreach yourself, and we aren't able to meet Bewitching Maiden Ro? You don't know, this woman is really the most exquisite of the highest grade. What a dumb teammate. His will was really too weak. Ling Han ignored him, and only closed his eyes in rest. He was too sure of himself. When Bewitching Maiden Ro saw the incomplete chant that had been restored, she would definitely be anxious to see the whole cultivation technique completely restored. Thus, the initiative was grasped in his hands. He indeed did not want to drop down to the same level as this woman in white, but there was no reason that he would be bossed around, either. Humph! The woman in white was proud too, and directly turned around and left. Sigh! Fu Gaoyun sighed, but did not set off to pursue her. Faced with a choice of either his brother or a beautiful woman, he still chose the former. Yet Ling Han smiled and said, Would you believe it? Not too long after, she will come back. Chapter 1783 Bewitching Maiden Ro. Chapter 1783 Bewitching Maiden Ro. Fu Gaoyun naturally wouldn't believe him. Bewitching Maiden Ro had very great airs. It was rare that she was willing to invite someone to see her, yet you directly ignored the messenger. Who would pay you any further regard? However, Fu Gaoyun would not say these words right in front of Ling Han, and could only smile bitterly. Thanks to Ling Han, he had already seen Bewitching Maiden Ro once. Though he still wanted to see her a second and third time, he had still seen her, after all, so there was no need for any regrets. Yet, a while later, the woman in white was seen coming back. This time, her face was plastered with a smile, and when she saw Ling Han, she curtsied slightly, and delicately said, "My name is Jingyu. Previously, I have offended young master. Please do not remember my fault, young master. As long as young master is willing to forgive me, you may beat or scold me as you like." Fu Guoyun's mouth suddenly gaped widely, his eyes wide, stuck in complete disbelief. This was the personal female attendant of Bewitching Maiden Row, and she really could be considered very proud. She did not even pay much regard to him, an heir of the Fu clan, but now actually said that Ling Han could beat her or scold her as he liked. This was too much of an exaggeration, right? Gasp. He was also a smart man, and so immediately realized that the cultivation technique that Bewitching Maiden Row had taken out for them to restore was extraordinary. Otherwise, he could not have imagined any reason that Bewitching Maiden Row would have this female attendant bow her head. Later, he definitely had to tell Ling Han that he should not just be occupied with restoring the cultivation technique, but would have to memorize this cultivation technique completely as well. It was too important. Ling Han smiled faintly and asked, "Without rhyme or reason, why should I beat or scold you?" "Young master." The woman in white directly knelt down and lowered her upper body. From Ling Han's position, he could clearly see through to the stretch of snow white at her collar, as well as those two slightly rounded parts. Though only a bit was revealed, it would linger in memory, and fill a man with the urge to see even more. Ho, she was using a charm technique on him? Ling Han closed his eyes, not even wanting to speak any further. "Young master, I really recognize my mistake." When the woman in white saw this, her expression changed repeatedly. Previously, when she had returned to make her report, she had been reprimanded by Bewitching Maiden Row, who commanded that she definitely had to be polite to Ling Han, and she was to invite him over at all costs. But she was still very defiant, and thought that she only had to use her charm technique, and Ling Han would definitely give in to her obediently. This time, she knew that she had completely read Ling Han wrongly, and was so scared that she began to repeatedly kowtow. "Young master is a magnanimous man, so please spare me." Pun. Her forehead knocked endlessly on the floorboards, creating a very loud sound. Ling Han was amenable to coaxing, but not coercion. Since she had already bowed her head and admitted her fault, and furthermore, it was only disdaining him for a short while previously, he did not bother about her too much. His slender figure rose, and he said, "Fine then. I will go meet with your sect's holy daughter." Fu Guoyun couldn't help but give him a thumbs up mentally. Usually, it would only be others that would be begging to meet Bewitching Maiden Row. When had it been that Bewitching Maiden Row would turn around to beg someone to meet her? Impressive. The Empress walked over. She, too, wanted to meet this Bewitching Maiden Row, and see how she compared with herself. At first, the woman in white wanted to stop her, but after taking a look at Ling Han, she obediently closed her mouth. It was best not to offend Ling Han now. The four of them flew over to the Purity Sect's battleship together. On the great ship, there were a great many women patrolling. Because the woman in white was leading them, none of them called them to a halt and asked their business. After boarding the vessel, they soon arrived in front of the largest room inside. "Please wait for a while," the woman in white said. She delivered a knock on the doors to the room, and a languid voice rang out from within after a while. "Come in." This voice was very low, but it could be clearly heard. It was like being scratched by a kitten, causing an itch in the heart of anyone who heard this voice. There was no need to see the actual speaker. Merely this voice alone could enchant the senses, and cause one's mind to be filled with endless fantasies. What kind of enchanting beauty was this? The woman in white pushed the doors open, and then extended her hand to Ling Han and his companion to show them the way in. Fu Guoyun was the first to enter, while Ling Han and the Empress walked in together. The moment they entered, they saw a woman who was presently lying on top of a massive rattan chair. She was wearing a pale yellow long skirt, her complexion snow white, and her beautiful face was astonishingly exquisite. Compared to the Empress, she was only slightly inferior. However, Her eyes were really too seductive, as if they had a life of their own, or as if they could talk and showed her soul, causing one's heart to beat faster. Since she was lying down, she naturally was not wearing shoes or any socks. She revealed two beautiful dainty feet that were as smooth as jade, her toenails all pink. That was not because she had painted them, but due to their natural appearance. However, most of the beautiful legs were hidden within her long skirt, and only a small bit was revealed. Yet, it was more enchanting like this. And Ling Han could confirm through this one look that she was definitely a great beauty. Though her beauty was inferior compared to Hu Niu and the Empress, the charm technique that she had cultivated greatly increased her personal charm, so in truth, she was not too far behind, either. No wonder that whether it was Fu Gaoyun and other such young king tiers, or elites from the older generation, they all wished to keep her as their mistress. If Ling Han had still been a lonely bachelor, he, too, might have begun to fiercely court this woman as well. But now, he withdrew his gaze, his eyes clear. He sat down with the Empress, their hands still holding together. This was practically a torture to singles. Bewitching Maiden Ro couldn't help but feel surprised. It was not that she had not seen men pretend to be reserved in front of her, but which one of them had been truly reserved? Hadn't they all just wanted to deliberately draw her notice, and were just taking the opposite route? She had seen many men of this type, so she was unperturbed by their tricks. But Ling Han did not appear to be putting on a pretense of reservedness. His eyes were too frighteningly clear. Otherwise, no matter how much he pretended, she would still be able to see *** in his eyes. Just take Fu Gaoyun, who was sitting by his side, as an example. Though he was a king tier of the present generation, he was still unable to conceal his desire. So this is Ling Han, young Master Ling? Her face bore a faint smile, not as proud as the Empress, nor as clingy as Hu Niu, yet it contained strongly her personal charisma in her expression. Ling Han nodded and said, I am Ling Han. I heard that young Master Ling helped young Master Fu to restore that incomplete chant? Bewitching Maiden Ro asked. Ling Han did not want to bother wasting time on trivialities with her, and said, If you want me to help you restore the entire technique, I can. Take out that cultivation technique, and allow me to study it slowly. This? Bewitching Maiden Ro showed a hint of hesitation. She had obtained that cultivation technique in coincidental circumstances, but because it was unbearably incomplete, she did not dare to cultivate it rashly. Otherwise, the consequences would be extremely severe. The higher the grade of the celestial technique, the more dangerous it was. But she had a feeling that this cultivation technique was very extraordinary. She did not mind taking out a single page for others to study. In any case, it was only a single page. No one could possibly infer the previous contents, or the contents after through this one page, but if she took out the entire cultivation technique, that would have too many implications. But if it could not be restored completely, it would be useless even if she guarded the cultivation technique firmly. Thus, after a long moment of thought, she still nodded slowly and said, All right. She glanced at Ling Han, slightly angry. This guy actually didn't even want to bother talking with her, and instead wanted to immediately begin restoring the cultivation technique. She was really about to die from fury. What an insensitive blockhead! Chapter 1784 Give Yourself Then. Chapter 1784 Give Yourself Then. Bewitching Maiden Ro pushed herself up with her hands. It was only a single action, but it fully displayed the elegance and languid nature that was purely feminine. Her hair of black locks cascaded like a waterfall, revealing one side of her exquisite face. Fu Gaoyun instantly stared dumbly at her. Ling Han felt rueful. No wonder Fu Gaoyun was even willing to surrender a celestial medicine to her wholeheartedly at the time. This bewitching maiden was really a huge calamity. There were definitely not many men that could withstand her charisma. However, if the Empress was willing to open her mouth, it was guaranteed that even women would be captivated to dizziness by her. Bewitching Maiden Ro's action was very slow, exhibiting the enticement of the body to the fullest. But when she saw that Fu Gaoyun was practically about to salivate, while Ling Han was completely unmoved, the surprise in her heart increased even more. Could it be that she really had to actively use her charm technique to be able to lure this guy? Her use and grasp of charm techniques had already reached perfection, and would not fall into disadvantage. What the charm techniques compounded on was her personal charisma, and not something as simple as making the target feel a need in that particular area. For men that saw her, what they wanted more was to possess her, and not to impatiently take her for their own. But why were charm techniques called charm techniques? When she actively used her charm techniques, the enticement it rendered on men was fatal. They would be filled with an urge to possess her at all costs, and when it had really reached that time, she would take advantage of the opening to make her move, so it was naturally very easy for her. Bewitching Maiden Ro's delicate hand shook, and an ancient book appeared on the table. It was very seriously damaged, and should have been corroded by the power of time. Young Master Fu, as well as this little sister, please withdraw, Bewitching Maiden Ro said. She feared that these two people would memorize the cultivation technique. If Ling Han was unable to restore it, they could still bring the incomplete technique and find another to help them. Fu Gaoyun did not say another word. He immediately stood up, turned, and exited the room. He could even surrender a celestial medicine to her wholeheartedly, so what was a mere cultivation technique worth to him? The Empress ignored her, though, and only cast a disdainful glance at Bewitching Maiden Ro. She wanted to boss her around? Humph! This little sister! Bewitching Maiden Ro fixed her eyes on the Empress, and her gaze involuntarily became tense. What a perfect figure! Furthermore, though her face was veiled, her noble and poised demeanor was still hard to conceal, filling others with the desire of wanting to kneel at her feet and worship her. Shock filled her heart. It should be known that she was a woman herself, and had cultivated charm techniques at that, so her will was incredibly strong. And even with all this, she actually felt the impulse to kneel at the other woman's feet and worship her? Just how strong was this woman's charm? Little sister, how should I address you? She asked, thinking, could it be that this woman has also cultivated some kind of charm technique, and that was why my heart was beating faster? The Empress stretched out a hand and knocked on the back of the chair as she said, Call me big sister. Bewitching Maiden Ro couldn't help but feel angry. She was the holy daughter of the Purity Sect. Furthermore, she was the only heir. In the future, she was definitely going to become the sect leader of the Purity Sect, and take possession of a 3-star force. And you actually wanted her to call you a big sister? Little sister, you have very strong self-confidence, she stated slowly. The Empress only cast her a sidelong glance. If the other party didn't call her big sister, she couldn't even feel bothered to talk with her. Fuck, she had actually been ignored. Bewitching Maiden Ro was dumbfounded. What was wrong with this world? An exquisite calamity like her would actually experience being ignored? She was about to say something else, but when she saw that Ling Han was already flipping through the ancient book, she forcibly closed her mouth. She definitely could not afford to disturb Ling Han now. Ling Han flipped through very quickly, and wherever his eyes passed, the 9 heavens flame would flicker, and then those missing letters would appear one after another. The majority of the text was very normal, but there was also some that was incredibly ancient. In fact, it couldn't even be called text. There was only one symbol, the symbol of Great Tao. This could only be inscribed by supreme elites, and others would not be able to form this kind of symbol in their minds at all. This required a very high comprehension of Great Tao. This kind of symbol could suppress the heaven and earth and lock time. Thus, not one of these symbols on the ancient book had been damaged. In truth, it was precisely because of these symbols that this ancient book had managed to last for so many years. Otherwise, it would have long since been corroded and turned into nothing. Ling Han quickly flipped through once. He closed his eyes, and the whole cultivation technique instantly appeared in his mind, exuding the light of Great Tao. If he presently shirked and said that he could not restore it, he would be able to possess this celestial king cultivation technique alone. However, he was not that kind of person. He was not someone who could kick someone to the curb when they outlived their usefulness. Moreover, even if others obtained it, they would only be capable of controlling the normal fire element of heaven and earth. But he was able to control the 9 heavens flame. There was absolutely no comparison in might between the two. Thus, after pondering a while, he drew out pen and paper, and began writing on it. The letters flowed smoothly, but when he reached those symbols of Great Tao, Ling Han could not copy them, and could only indicate which page of the original book they were on. He wrote very quickly, and after slightly over an hour, a whole cultivation technique was already complete. That's all? Bewitching Maiden Ro couldn't help but feel stunned. She had also passed this cultivation technique to be viewed by her master, who was the sect leader of the Purity Sect, Nansuyu, but the latter had not written a single letter even after many years of studying. This was the fruit of the heart and blood of a celestial king, and a mere immortal Palace-tier wanted to restore it. She had to be joking. But Ling Han actually finished it after using only half a day's time. This was too astonishing. It can't be that you were only writing randomly, right? Bewitching Maiden Ro took the manuscript over, and hurriedly flipped through it. The more she read, the more shocked she felt, and also the more excited. This was clearly, undoubtedly, and definitely the complete cultivation technique. If she was asked to create a Celestial King technique, that was an absolutely impossible feat, but if it was merely to distinguish the authenticity of a cultivation technique, she was at least 90% confident. That was because if something was off with the cultivation technique, it would naturally be sluggish, as she went over it in her mind. Prodigy. No, how could this be anything as simple as a prodigy? She didn't even know what words she could use to describe him. She only knew that this cultivation technique was very amazing, but was not clear that this was actually a Celestial King's secret technique. Otherwise, she would definitely be twice as stunned. However, it was really a coincidence. Otherwise, whichever other cultivation technique it was guaranteed that Ling Han could not possibly think through a single letter even if he spent a few 100 million years. But who asked things to be really so coincidental? Young Master Ling, I will remember this favor. Bewitching Maiden Ro smiled beautifully. This was really a huge favor. Even if she gave him a few celestial medicines, it would not be enough to repay this favor. If she knew that this was a Celestial King technique, then she would really have no idea how she was to express her thanks. There is no need to remember. Just give yourself then. The Empress suddenly spoke up. Bewitching Maiden Ro suddenly showed a hint of embarrassment, but her beautiful face was still all smiles as she said, "This little sister is really fond of her jokes. However, if I really did marry young Master Ling, wouldn't little sister have to worry?" Worry about what? Naturally, worry about Ling Han's soul favor. As a woman that was so beautiful and alluring, she was practically a witch that was capable of luring others to their deaths with her charm. What man would cast another woman a second look once they had her? This was a counter-checkmate. The Empress was unmoved and said, "That cultivation technique will become your dowry. Come, let's go." You really took it seriously, huh? Bewitching Maiden Ro's expression stiffened, and she said, "This little sister, you should know when to stop your jokes." Yet the Empress was insistent. "Husband, grab her!" Chapter 1785 9 Revolutions Charm Physique. Chapter 1785 9 Revolutions Charm Physique. Ling Han was puzzled. Why did the Empress suddenly create trouble? She was indeed overbearing in her ways, but would never create trouble willfully. However, this was the battleship of the Purity Sect, and who knew how many elites occupied this ship? If they kidnapped her forcefully, wasn't that merely courting death? Moreover, this holy daughter might be an elite of the Fourth Severance, so who would be capturing whom? Forget it, wife. Ling Han pulled on the Empress's hand. Only then did the Empress fall silent, looking like she was not going to lower herself to her level. Bewitching Maiden Ro almost exploded with fury. She was actually being looked down on. If this was another person, she would not be concerned at all, but the Empress's aura was too overbearing, and it also seemed like her beauty could surpass the ancients and dazzle contemporaries, causing her to think of the Empress as a fierce rival. This kind of disdain gave her enormous pressure. "See them away!" She waved a hand dismissively, panting with rage. Ling Han and the Empress exited, and Fu Gaoyun was waiting at the doors. When he saw the two of them come out, he hurriedly asked. How is it? Not bad, Ling Han answered casually, making entirely no mention of the matter that had happened just now. Fu Gaoyun immediately sighed in relief, and wished to enter and bid Bewitching Maiden Ro farewell, yet the woman in white blocked his way, and coldly said, Our holy daughter is about to rest. Young Master Fu, please leave. Fu Gaoyun was immediately crestfallen, but it would not be proper for him to use force either. Thus, he could only leave gloomily with Ling Han and the Empress. But the fact that Fu Gaoyun had managed to repeatedly board the ship was seen by others, and all of them took special notice of Fu Gaoyun. Could it be that Bewitching Maiden Ro was viewing him in a new light? Otherwise, why would she treat him so favorably? When they returned to their own battleship, Ling Han and the Empress entered into their room. He immediately asked, Is there something wrong with that bewitching maiden? The Empress smiled beautifully and replied, Husband, you must obtain her. Ling Han sweated like mad. His wife was actually using such a determined expression and tone to tell him to pursue another woman. No matter how he thought about it, it was very weird. He already had enough love debts on his plate, and he really had no wish to have more. Why? He asked. Though the Empress had previously expressed the intention to take Lin Yuro into his harem, that was only mere teasing. However, looking at the Empress's current expression, she was being serious. She has the 9 Revolutions Charm Physique. The Empress's expression was serious. Then she added, A divine fetus. Divine fetus. Only then was Ling Han stunned, and showed a hint of shock in his expression. Even in the celestial realm, divine fetus was not something common, but rather pitifully rare. It was said that Fu Xiaoyun herself was a divine fetus, but Ling Han had not discovered any special trait in her no matter how hard he tried. And now the Empress actually said that Bewitching Maiden Ro was a divine fetus. Trust me, the Empress said with absolute certainty. This is something that the memories in my bloodline have told me, and the 9 Revolutions Charm Physique is an extremely rare type of inheritance that could only be born from an 8 Revolutions Charm Physique. The Empress should be a descendant of some celestial king. After obtaining a slightly more complete 9 Death's Heaven art, her bloodline inheritance had been awoken, and she had gained some other memories that did not belong to her. This was knowledge about some supreme cultivation techniques, supreme inheritance, and supremely dangerous locations of the celestial realm. The 9 Revolutions Charm Physique belonged to a very special category among divine fetuses because only an 8 Revolutions Charm Physique could give birth to the former, and that was only a possibility. It was also possible that the offspring born would not inherit the charm physique, and then she would only be limited to 8 revolutions. Above 8 revolutions was 7 revolutions, and above 7 revolutions was 6 revolutions. Just think, not only would the time expended through these many generations be incredibly long, no mistake could be allowed, either. Otherwise, wherever there was a lapse in the inheritance of the charm physique, there would naturally be no possibility of the birth of a 9 Revolutions Charm Physique. For example, Gu Daoi had used 10 lives to form a supreme divine fetus, and the difficulty of forming a 9 Revolutions Charm Physique actually surpassed that. With such thought, Ling Han immediately felt that Bewitching Maiden Ro was very amazing. It was no wonder that her charm techniques were so strong. She was a 9 Revolutions Charm Physique, a divine fetus. But even if she is a divine fetus, Ling Han scratched his head. There was still no need to capture her to become his wife. Dual cultivation with a 9 Revolutions Charm Physique would create a resonance with the Tao of heaven and earth, and in the future, it may be possible to even birth a natural manifestation of heavenly Tao, a child that can naturally merge with great Tao, the Empress said. So amazing? Ling Han thought for a moment, yet still shook his head, and smilingly said, So what? I believe in my own strength, and I do not need something like dual cultivation. He embraced the Empress, kissing her tender and beautiful rose-like lips. The Empress was elated, and her arms wrapped around Ling Han's head and neck as she kissed him back earnestly. Come, let's dual cultivate. Ling Han lifted the Empress into his arms, and entered into the Black Tower. All of a sudden, he very much desired her. After a bout of clinging to each other, Ling Han taught the flame control technique to the Empress. Though he was unable to copy those unique symbols of great Tao, the Empress had seen them with her own eyes previously, so it was no problem. The two of them discussed this secret technique underneath the reincarnation tree, and the heavenly phoenix divine Maiden was unable to cut into their conversation. She could only lean against Ling Han's side, slightly resentful. At present, she was unable to help Ling Han in the slightest. Ling Han and the Empress were both people of astonishing natural talent, and they very quickly developed a considerable grasp over this secret technique. However, no matter how strong the Celestial King technique was, it would still be limited by their cultivation level, and could not possibly help them, cultivators only at the second severance, show the battle prowess of the dividing soul tier. They exited the Black Tower, and began to use it practically. If they were in the Black Tower, the regulations unique to the Black Tower existed, and all cultivation techniques were based on the regulations of the great Tao of the outside world, so it was completely inappropriate to use them inside the Black Tower. Thus, no matter how strong a person was, once they entered into the Black Tower, they could only be rendered helpless. Because the regulations were different, even if you were a Celestial King, you would be turned into a rookie the moment you entered. Of course, the issue of drawing a Celestial King into the Black Tower was a big problem. Furthermore, Celestial Kings were a world of their own, so that would be a clash between two worlds and two types of regulations, so who knew, it might be the Black Tower that would explode first. The Empress channeled the flame control technique, and a ball of fire immediately burst into life in her hand. This was the element of fire of heaven and earth that had been created by the Celestial King technique. "So strong," the Empress remarked with a nod. "This is definitely a top-grade cultivation technique." Ling Han nodded. Even he could sense how frightening this ball of fire was. It was completely capable of refining his powerful physique forcefully. Of course, the time it would take was not just 2 to 3 days, but rather would be counted in years at least. His right hand also shook. Boom, a flame similarly formed. It was not created by condensing the fire element of the heaven and earth, but rather came from within his body. 9 heavens flame. With a thought from him, the 9 heavens flame turned into a sword of fire. It was incredibly realistic, and there were multiple symbols of great Tao on the sword's blade. Upon a closer look, they were actually exactly like those from the flame control technique. That Celestial King should have drawn out the symbols of great Tao from within the 9 heavens flame, and inscribed them into the cultivation technique. He was really amazing, being able to extract even such symbols of great Tao. Ling Han waved the fiery sword lightly, and no matter what it struck, it would immediately be cut. Under the control of a Celestial King technique, he could further incite more might from the 9 heavens flame. "At present, I have the confidence to battle a peak stage at the 4th severance." He laughed loudly, filled with confidence. Of course, he currently would only be able to match a normal peak stage of the 4th severance. If it was a flawless severance, he probably would still be slightly inferior, and if it was an opponent that had struck the heaven and earth, then putting aside the 4th severance, he could only barely cope even with the 3rd severance, and that would have to depend on whether the opponent was in the early stage, middle stage, late stage, or the peak stage. However, if he really inflicted a direct strike with the 9 heavens flame, then to say nothing of the peak stage of the 4th severance, even dividing soul tiers would be killed. At this time, a sudden clamor rose up from outside. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.